Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Doing Virtue podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Criste, and tonight we have Father Bjorn Lundberg, and I'm going to read a little bio from him, courtesy of ChatGPT, and we're going to see how accurate it is. So, Father Bjorn Lundberg was born in Nuremberg, Germany, where he spent his childhood moving between various locations, including Fort Hood, Texas, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and Fairfax, Virginia, due to his family's military background. After attending Christendom College in Front Royal for his undergraduate degree in history, he interned at Vatican Radio for the summer of 1997 and afterwards worked as an associate producer for 2 years at EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network. Eventually, he pursued seminary studies at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Ambler, PA, Pennsylvania, where he received his master's degree in both divinity and moral theology and was ordained a priest in June of 2006. Father Lundberg then served as the parochial vicar of both the Cathedral of St. Thomas More in Arlington and afterwards St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Then in 2012, he was appointed as the head chaplain for St. John Paul the Great Catholic High School. Since 2017, he has served as the pastor of Sacred Heart of Jesus Catholic Church in Winchester, Virginia. Under his leadership, the parish celebrated its 150th year history in Winchester, marking a significant milestone in the community's religious life. In March 2020, during the health crisis, I love that, Father Lundberg was among many alumni priests who ministered to the faithful, demonstrating his commitment to the community during this challenging time. He has participated in 6 World Youth Days, including Denver in 1993, Toronto in 2002, Cologne in 2005, Sydney in 2008, Madrid in 2011, and Krakow in 2016. Father Lundberg appears regularly on EWTN's Morning Glory weekly radio show and has been interviewed numerous times by Raymond Arroyo on his program World Over. And that is Father Lundberg's life in an entire nutshell. How was that?
Overall, interesting, and it's not totally accurate.
Okay.
But it's funny because St. Charles is in Philly, so I guess, I don't know, technically, I would have said it's in Wynwood. Okay. So I don't know about Ambler, but I don't know if it's because they moved and it's just using the new location. But then I was on the radio for about 4 years with Morning Glory, but that ended a couple years back.
Okay.
And then one time during COVID, I got interviewed by Raymond.
Okay. So not numerous times.
Not numerous times.
Okay.
Been in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. No.
Okay.
But yeah, so.
Yeah, so I edited some of the grammar, but I kept the order the same because I thought it was interesting just how it present, like the World Youth Day thing was kind of random.
Yeah.
So I assume, and it's really interesting, you're probably a little bit more on the network just because you have social media and you've been interviewed and there's been some like publications about you at different parishes. But some people who are really off the grid, it literally is like where they went to school and their spouse, and then anything else. It could be them or it could just be someone with the same last name,
right,
or an article that actually wasn't about them. But yeah, I thought it's pretty accurate, and that was almost word for word what ChatGPT came up with in 2 seconds.
Sometimes I get confused online with Bjorn Lundberg,
yeah,
the anti-environmentalist, anti-global warming guy. And
it's spelled slightly differently, though, right?
Do you know who that guy is? I say, yeah, really, it's my nom de plume. I secretly write, reviews about greenhouse gases on the weekend.
What I should have put is that you've been interviewed multiple times by Jordan Peterson,
right? Exactly.
With alternative spelling, but yeah,
right,
yeah. So we're here today to talk about global warming and fake
by
identities.
A priest with a lot of hot air, long homilies, contributing.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get into the episode, would you mind leading us in a quick prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. 2 prayers. First are Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. This is a favorite prayer to St. Joseph. O glorious St. Joseph, you have power to render possible things which are considered impossible. Come to our aid in our present trouble and distress. Take these important intentions under your particular care, that they may end happily. So everyone pray for your intentions. O St. Joseph, you who are so powerful with Jesus and Mary, show that your goodness equals your power. St. Joseph, friend of the Sacred Heart, pray for us. May Almighty God bless you, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for making this happen. James Schlosser has been like, Father, you got to get on this podcast. So he'll be happy. I'll text him when this is done.
There you go.
Did
Good.
This. And then I was talking with you earlier about how, I'm sitting there thinking about, I went to college with your parents, and now I'm on a podcast with you, which is sort of something outside of space and time. I don't know how to exactly evaluate that.
Well, God works out of space and time. So
right.
Outside of, yeah. So.
And then this year too, it's been kind of interesting because, with the Holy Father's health crisis, we've been praying for him, and it reminds you of all of us of our mortality. And then one of the chaplains from when I was at Christendom, he passed away recently, Father Scaris, and was a very impressive and very good priest. And so I was blessed to be able to get to his funeral. And then when, as it said, my dad, with his military career, we were in Tacoma, Washington. I went to Bellarmine Prep, which was the rival of my dad's high school growing up. My dad was from the Pacific Northwest, and one of the chaplains there, Father Jerry Chapdelaine, just passed away Sunday night. And so it's just been striking me, priests that have had impact on my life, and you pray for them. They've, God willing, pushed over the threshold into their eternal reward. And just, that Therese says the earth is our ship and not our home, so on one level, you look back over your life and you say, goes by as in a couple blinks, like again, Therese says our life is like an instant between two eternities. And so it's good, with Lent and thinking about why we're here and where we're going, to keep in mind that C.S. Lewis says, there are far, far greater things that lie ahead of us than anything we give up or leave behind. And so when you think about people's journey, their life story, their path, it's interesting to look back in hindsight, like in the rearview mirror, and see how God has guided you. And then there's always this terrifying feeling of, trusting God. Like Mother Angelica says that faith is like having one foot on the ground and one foot in the air and a queasy feeling in your stomach. And then like trying to move forward, like you're married, you have a family, I'm the father of a family with 10,000 kids, and like, I just recently saw a priest on social media talking about the fact that in canon law, it says that the pastor is responsible for every soul in his parish, not every Catholic, and the bishop is responsible for every soul that lives in the Diocese of Arlington. And so suddenly you're really, you're in the hot seat and you just become aware more and more of your own frailty and your mistakes. But again, it helps you because it helps you discover that the heart of the faith is just such good news of a loving Father who's taking care of us and guiding us. And so it's great to be with a great kid from Friends talking about social media and life and all these adventures.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate you being here. It's been a little bit of back and forth to get it scheduled, even though it's, I think it's a particular challenge in this day and age. Like if podcasting was a thing 50 years ago, right, or even further, like 100 years ago, if we actually had the technology, it'd be so easy because no one else was really doing anything. Right. But now with social media, it seems like people have way more events going on, and particularly priests, I think, are way more busy. Maybe that's just a false observation, but trying to get 2 or 3 hours on a weeknight with a priest is almost impossible. And I've learned that inviting them to dinner helps, but not always. No, but like there's evening mass, there's evening confessions. You never know when there's going to be a communion call. Right. Especially at a big parish.
No, I lucked out because on the schedule I wasn't on for confession, so I was like, okay, I can make that work.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah. I've learned with priests I have to schedule usually a month and a half out, if not 2 months out, and then the day before, I don't know if it's going to happen. And that's just the reality.
That makes me feel better. I'm not the only one.
No, you're not.
Special needs.
Yeah, but everyone else who's not a priest that I'm inviting should get back to me sooner. That's uniquely the priest's excuse.
Well, then, right. But then, people are going to say, well, you only work 1 hour a week on Sunday, And so on some level, it's, again, I'm blessed. My parents are both still alive. My dad's 85. My mom, he's turning 85 in 2 weeks. My mom's turning 78. I don't know if we should tell your mother's age on the podcast. But again, you look back and you realize the sacrifices that your parents made. I don't know if you've ever seen that hilarious skit of Jim Gaffigan where he talks about going to Disney World. Yeah. And so he's there and he's standing in line. It's like, he's like standing in line on the DMV on the surface of the sun. Yeah, right. And he says, you remember as a kid, why was dad always in such a bad mood? It's like, well, it was either this or your college tuition, But so, suddenly it's like you look back and you're like, wow, and thank God I can have these conversations with my father. Like, why did you do this? Or, as a kid, he's very type A Army officer and he had all these priorities for us. And then, you had a certain take on things. And then now I'm 50 and I'm running a parish and he's retired and he's like this local grandpa to a bunch of people. But you start going, wow, your parents had to deal with all these things, and now there's all these responsibilities. And so I think a lot of times people don't know most of their experience with a priest is just, what do you like on in mass on Sunday at the altar? Mm-hmm. So depending on your liturgical personality and your style of preaching, that's like for 99% of the people, their impression of you. Mm-hmm. But if they can see you off camera at a parish event or in the office or at some function. I remember we were at World Youth Day. That's why I laughed. ChatGPT found this out. So like last year there was this, because of the time I was on the radio, I knew this one producer for EWTN. And so she contacted me about, they were doing a spot on World Youth Day. And I was like, well, I did penance for all my sins because I went to 6 World Youth Days. It's like, that should count for something. And so these experiences of going to World Youth Day, you're just like, wow, this is a big experience of the church, and how, you just see the universality of the church and the need to evangelize people and the work that's got to be done today. So,
yeah, I thought it was funny. I don't know there must be some article that
there is.
You stated that in, because you can see the difference
National
between
Catholic Register.
Some of those sentences, I bet, are pulled word for word
Right.
from a, like maybe your parish bio.
Right.
He served at this parish,
Right.
now he's here.
Right.
It seemed like there was one sentence in there when it talked about the health crisis.
Right.
I don't know where that
I don't
was
know where
from.
that came from, right.
And it also the 150 years of being like an established religious community.
Because it was
like,
an
that must be a
article-
publication from something in
Right.
Winchester.
It was a Winchester Star, but it
Winchester
got picked
Star,
up either
okay.
on the AP or something, because it ran the Washington Post. It ran in a number of national papers just because it was on their wire, or however that works. So yeah, that's I think where it came from.
It is really fun. If it's a really complex topic, you won't be able to. But when it's a bio on a particular person, you can almost guess which sentences, based on the way that they're written, are from like an actual news source, or just like a little website blog,
Right.
Or maybe some of the advanced ones. If you've been really well published and you've been on a lot of recordings and videos, you can tell that it's actually a verbatim quote from like an interview.
Okay.
It won't have quotes on it, but you can tell that it's in the cadence that someone would speak and not write necessarily.
Right.
So yeah, it's just fascinating. I started using it recently because it's like 95% accurate, and the times when it's not inaccurate, it's really funny to try to figure out why it's inaccurate.
Where did that
so
come
I had Mike Turner on, who's a parishioner at St. John's,
Right.
and his was, I think, like 98% accurate. And the last paragraph, there's another Mike Turner, locally unaffiliated, whose mother owns one of the old historic cemetery associations or something. Right. And so I was like, and it says, your mother owns this cemetery thing. At the end of it, he was like, I have no idea who that is. It's not related to me. I'm like, oh, okay, well, now I'm going to remember that for all time, that you're not the son of
a cemetery association running owner.
So, all right. So tonight we are drinking Old Hillside. It's a straight rye whiskey. I actually bought this for another occasion, for a guest that was coming from Kentucky who recommended it. And he ended up canceling because he had some family emergency and canceled his whole East Coast trip.
Oh, no.
So it's been sitting on my shelf, and I thought, I think Father Lundberg would like this.
Yeah, it's rye whiskey. I love rye whiskey.
So yeah, I don't know if there's tasting notes on the bottle. Usually I do tasting notes, but when I'm here with my editors and producers, I'll usually get one of them to read some tasting notes, and we'll try to like guess and see like who's closest. And a lot of times my takeaway is, I don't think it's worth it for the price, or I think it's worth it for the price, and then I'll just comment on the bottle. And that's pretty much like, this looks like a gin bottle to me, like a little one of those little like fancy gin bottles. Kind of a neat little label too. So
I always laugh because I feel like it's just kind of a redneck, or some country bumpkin. Like, I don't know about tasting notes. Oh, there's a hint of Jolly Rancher in here, and some burnt marshmallow. And
can you, if you read it though? If
I
someone
read it,
gives
then
you a
it's
description,
projection. Then I'm like,
you
you can taste that. It's
but can you honestly come to that conclusion, or is it like, yeah, I taste vanilla? Not
it's a combination.
I don't want to look stupid.
Okay, I'm not too. I already feel like I do enough things that look stupid, so I'm not too worried about that.
Okay. But
at the same time, like, okay, I'm gonna try to like let this linger on my palate, and suddenly I'm gonna become this whiskey snob.
Yeah.
But more normally, it's just like, oh, you have that? Sure, I'll take that.
Right. Do you have a go-to whiskey? Like if you go to a bar and order something, or you're going to buy a bottle, do you have a
Maker's Mark or Knob Creek?
Okay.
But usually it's,
yeah.
I'm like the mooch who someone's saying, oh, you want a drink? Oh, sure, I'd love one. Thank you. I always joke like,
my mouth is a little dry.
Right. Like, I like bourbon, but it's Lent, so I'm going to drink scotch, or something. So.
Right. Yeah.
So raise a toast to for prior guest for his family emergency, and that would work out well. And then to Father Jerry and Father Scaris.
Yeah. Cheers.
I'm thinking I got to taste some kind of magic.
A little bit of honey, a little bit of,
That's right.
3-year-old sidewalk. Do you know Dr. McInerney?
I do. He taught prior to Christendom. He was a professor at John Paul the Great High School, where I was chaplain.
Okay.
So after I left and came out to Winchester, then he came to Christendom.
Okay. So usually before we start recording, I'll ask, "Hey, are you a whiskey enthusiast, or are you just you have no idea what you're talking about?"
Right.
Totally fine either way. But I just don't want to bore you acting like I know what's going on if you are actually really into this.
Right.
And he's like, He's like, I think I'm good at coming up with ways to describe what I'm tasting, but I don't think I'm an enthusiast. So we all take sips, and all of us at the table are like, yeah, that's good. And that was kind of our comment. And he was like, that was really simple, but precocious. And we were like, okay, all right, get out of here. You clearly know more about this than I do.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So Dr. McInerney with This Is Good Rye Whiskey. You should try.
Maybe I'll send him a bottle. Another idea we were talking about sponsorships and things for the podcast earlier. A unique idea that I had that I'm sure someone else has had, but it seems unique when you think about it, and you haven't heard of anyone else thinking about it, was to, instead of having monthly supporters of the show or whatever, just say, hey, you can send us a one-time donation, and then you get to sponsor the bottle, and you get to pick whatever you want, and we'll drink it as long as it's not absolutely terrible.
Boone's Farm.
Right.
Generous benefactor brought this together.
Southern Comfort. Yeah. So anyway, so let's get into your background. You were born in Germany. Yes. So on a military base, or?
Well, I was born in, I don't know, we lived off base, but I have to check. It was a military hospital, so it was technically American territory.
Okay.
So my dad is from the Pacific Northwest. He grew up in Washington State, and he went to University of Washington. He did ROTC. He was manager for the Washington Huskies at the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row. And then when he graduated, he could have gone active duty right away, but his buddy asked him if he would be willing to teach with him for a year. So he taught at a poorer inner city high school or middle school in Bremerton, Washington. And then after that, he went active duty in 1963 and was assigned to Germany. And then I forget his last name, but he had a subordinate, a soldier under his supervision named Darnell, who came up to him and said, Lieutenant Colonel, whatever, or Major, whatever. It was, would you please co-sign for a loan for me at the bank so that Darnell could buy a Volkswagen? And all the leadership training that my dad would get as an officer is don't co-sign on the loan for a subordinate because you're on the hook for the loan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And also it can show favoritism because if you don't do it for everybody, why are you doing it just for this one? But he was kind of persistent. So my dad said, okay, fine, I'll go. And he kind of threatened him within an inch of his life that he had to make the loan payments and all that. So then he goes down to the caserne on the base there where there was a bank. It was partly sponsored by American Express. And my mom was working there. And she'd gone to a junior business college kind of set up there in Augsburg. And she had one job, and then this opportunity opened up at the base. And my grandfather, my opa, said, yes, she could work there because she wasn't 18 yet, but that on one condition that she didn't date American soldiers. And so she said, fine. So anyways, my dad goes in, he co-signs on the loan. And then a couple of days later, he calls back to ask her out. And it was payday. So she was kind of in this embarrassing situation. All her coworkers were on lunch break, and she's got this long line of GIs cashing their checks, and they can all hear her conversation. Like, we're going to have to call and ask my dad's permission and all this stuff. And she's kind of embarrassed. So anyways, they get married. And then
did she speak English at the time?
She did. She spoke very good English.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then, after they got married, they had several assignments in the States. First assignment was at Fort Lee in Richmond. And there were several other assignments. My sister was born in Seattle. My sister Christina Chapman here in the front row. And then they went back to Germany in 1974, and I was born in Nuremberg, but we lived in Ansbach. And he was a battalion commander. And then when I was almost 4, we moved to Fort Hood, Texas, which is now Fort Cavazos. And we were there through 2nd grade. Then 1 year in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, when my dad was at the War College and studying at Shippensburg University. And then in 4th grade, we moved to Fairfax, Virginia, right near Robinson and George Mason University. and grew up there and ended up going to public school. I'd gone to parochial school through there at that point, and then public school through my freshman year of high school at Robinson. My dad, who at the time was Lutheran, he would always go to mass with us, he wanted me to go to Paul VI, where my sister had gone, or to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. And I was rather hard-headed at that point. Well, I've always been. And I insisted I wanted to go to the local school. So, but I'm jumping ahead, but yes.
No.
Born in Germany.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Born in Germany. Yeah. What was your experience of the parochial schools at that time? Was it overly positive?
No, it was good. I mean, I didn't have a context. I mean, what we can go into later is that I look back at my younger self growing up in Fairfax County. I was a material heretic. I didn't know what the church taught. We went to mass every week. I'd gone to parochial schools. My parents were above average. We were faithful, always going to mass, and the church was a part of our life. I thought of myself as a Catholic. It wasn't a big part of my life. I didn't think of myself. I don't think I considered that I really prayed. I mean, we'd pray before meals, and we had, traditions. We had Advent traditions. It's very big in Germany. And my dad, kind of inspired by my mom's practice of faith, also had things that he promoted, in the family together, but, sometimes from scripture and things. So, I mean, parochial school was just my normal experience in grade school in Texas and then in Carlisle. I mean, I had negative experiences, but I think they were just kind of negative experiences that you might have in school. Not particularly because, I had nuns, but they weren't beating me with rulers or anything like that. And I think overall it was good. And then I don't remember this particular dramatic transition into public school, but I mean, I had a good experience overall. I mean, one of the things that I always liked, I'm a big sanguine extrovert, is that, I kind of knew I started to figure out that every couple of years we were going to move. So on one level growing up, I liked the fact that if I didn't like a place or, I wanted to kick the dust from my feet and move on, we were probably going to go to another place. I always had this romantic notion of wouldn't that be cool, broadly speaking, in the sense of growing up in a hometown and never moving. So like my dad had grown up in Washington State. So when we'd go visit our grandparents and our relatives in the summer and get to see the places where my dad grew up, that was really kind of this, wow, kind of like this is my dad's hometown and this is the home he grew up as a baby, so there was a sense of place and history, identity. But then, I think I had good experience in Catholic schools. There were some sisters who had a good impact and it was positive.
Okay. This might be kind of derailing a little bit, but I would imagine with the size of your parish that you have a lot of people that either grew up with a similar situation of being moved around because of military, or maybe they're doing the exact same thing now and they're at some point in that process.
Sure.
Seems like it's it's a huge struggle. It really does depend on the family, how many kids you have, all of that.
Sure.
But I think regardless of your scenario, even best case scenario, it's a really hard thing to move every 2 years, to get a new house, to pack everything up, to find a new community. And I think maybe it's easier now with technology, and we know like you can find Catholic communities better, and there's networking groups and things like that. But how did your family? Was it your just the leadership of your parents and they pushed you to go to mass and they pushed you to get involved in things, or how did they make it feel like kind of safe and secure and it was still home, even though every couple of years your life was kind of radically changed?
Well, it's interesting because on one level, I think, it's a credit to my parents, their hard work, their love, their sacrifice. I moved, I think, 5 times growing up. My parents, they just had their 59th wedding anniversary. But in 30 years in the Army, they moved 18 times, or maybe 17, and then 18th after. I'm not sure. But so on one level, excuse me, it's much to their credit that, at least for me, moving, maybe again, my temperament, moving wasn't a horrible experience. Since I'm the baby of the family, I think, people always just take care of you. So it just seems like things would work. Yes, I know that it was traumatic. I remember it was traumatic to move from Germany to Texas. It was the first move. I remember having memories of the fact that I was crying a lot as a 3-year-old, like I want to go back to Germany. But that was just early on. And then we got a dog. I think you got settled. Yeah. But I think, yes, when I tell people, when they tell me they're moving, moving ranks up there with death and divorce in terms of stress for a couple, for a married couple, for a family. So it's a tremendously stressful thing. I think at the time, and I don't know, I'm assuming it's like this still today on some level, the military in many ways is a good place in a certain sense for the family unit, because they know that they need to do things to reinforce the family, or at least they did when I was growing up. I mean, obviously things have changed a ton. So, we didn't always live on base, but when we did, I have this feeling, I always felt safe and secure. As a little kid in Germany, again, I have some memories, but especially when I was in high school. So in 1990, we moved to Washington State. So started my sophomore year. So I'd been freshman year at Robinson and Fairfax, and then we moved. And so 3 years we're living on base. I mean, you could leave your doors unlocked. You could leave your cars unlocked. There were MPs guarding the gate coming in and out. So in that sense, it was a very safe environment. And again, our family unit was strong. I think because we moved, or I don't know if that's for everybody, but we had a good family, and so we were important to each other. So, and then the faith, even in the limited form that I understood it at the time, was an integral part of our life. We always went to Mass. Now, it's kind of funny because, it's different times now, but as a kid, like my mom led the folk group. I grew up learning every glory and praise song there is by heart. I didn't know the Latin language existed. I didn't want to be a priest. I wasn't an altar boy, but we would go to Mass, the Vigil Mass, every Saturday night. And so just part of our life. And we had customs and traditions. And so the faith was a big part of it. And my dad, as a Lutheran, he had to agree to raise us Catholic, and he was really committed to our education, and he wanted us to be in parochial schools as much as possible. And we would have moved more frequently, but my parents made the decision to avoid certain career advancements. My dad could have gone farther, but they didn't want us to have to move every year, every 2 years. So but I do very much feel for people who move, because any move is hard. I mean, it's just a nightmare. Disrupts everything. And the burden of it fell on my mom, because when my dad would get the assignment, the military was like, well, you kind of need to be here yesterday.
Yeah.
And so then my mom, like when we moved my mom would have 2 little kids, and she's packing up, and we're moving to Texas or moving to Pennsylvania because dad's already up there ahead. So the burden of the moves fell on my mom, and she's super organized and super talented human being. And so she made that all happen. So in that sense, it was very smooth for us.
Do you remember a specific town, one of the towns you moved to, where the parish community was a bit stronger, or was it all kind of the same? It was some fairly conservative, fairly Orthodox. You would go to the Saturday night Mass. There was Catholic traditions in the family, but it wasn't like kind of smack you in the face Catholic.
Well, it's interesting because as a kid, yes, there were various impressions. At St. Joe's in Killeen, Texas, the pastor, from what I remember, just a few conversations growing up, was more conservative. But I mean, they were sisters, the religious sisters who were in the school. One of them was Sister Matea, the other was Sister Anacita, and they were both deceased. And I got to see Sister Matea right before I went in the seminary, so she could kind of know that one of her kids became a seminarian. But it was a good Catholic experience. I didn't have categories of robust versus not robust. I just knew we went to Mass, it was a part of our life, and the parish was a big presence. Carlisle was 1 year. It was on base. I know Mom was in the music. Beyond that, nothing sticks out. In Fairfax, I grew up at St. Mary's of Sorrows, and and we were very involved at the parish. Again, my mom's in the choir. My dad always got involved. Like when we were at we were at the War College in Carlisle, the sister, the principal of the parochial school at St. Patrick's there, recruited my dad, and he helped do this big report for her on the values of parochial education. So my family always has made the faith a priority. Beyond that, as a kid, I didn't think in terms of this is a strong parish or not. I didn't think that way. And then when we got to St. Mary's of Sorrows, the religious ed program was a little different. It was run out of the teacher's home. So if Anthony's teaching CCD or religious ed, the class would come to your house and you would teach there. So we switched to public school when I got to Fairfax for a number of reasons, and we'll go into that later. But so I was signed up for religious ed through St. Mary's, and one of my classmates at the school I was at in Burke, White Oaks, I was in the class with her because they broke us down by zip codes or whatever. And her mom taught the class, and her mom, I'm still in contact with her to this day. She wrote one of my letters of recommendation for the seminary. But I was an altar boy one time. I remember once as a little kid playing Mass at the coffee table with like a potato chip. That's all I can remember about that. And I had never served as an altar boy, but then In Carlisle, I did once, and I went to the practice, and I'm kind of ADHD. I would say that now. Didn't pay enough attention. It's my fault. But the only time I served, like everything went wrong. Like I was so nervous, so I had to close my eyes, and I'd be like, oh, and I open my eyes. Oh, everyone's kneeling. Oh no, kneel down. And then I get really nervous and close my eyes, and I open my eyes. Everyone was standing. Like I was like this moron who didn't know. He'd never been to mass before. I always feel bad for the altar servers. I'm like, if they're messing up, like, don't worry, buddy. I was a total mess, But so then I'm so stubborn, and I was so embarrassed by that I was like, I'm not serving again. And so I didn't serve till college. But then get into the CCD program at St. Mary's, and the teacher was amazing. I mean, my parents just told me, hey, you're going to CCD, you're going to take the bus home with Alex, and you're going to go to her house, we'll pick you up afterwards. And the teacher, her mom, was just brilliant, is brilliant. And she would have one of those big tins, like from Costco, the big buttered Danish sugar cookies, from Costco. So, and my mom is very health conscious. So growing up, we couldn't have junk food in the house and soda. So it's like the diabetes club. So I'm over there and like stuffing my face with these sugar cookies and then washing it down with corn syrup, with Coke or whatever. And so I was like, we could be talking about whatever you want to, gardening. I don't care. I'm getting a snack. I'm fine with it. So, and she was an excellent teacher. And so it was like when you read scripture, Jesus spoke with authority. I was like, ooh, when this woman, with Mrs. Mona Shahida, when she talked, you could just tell. Wow. I mean, to me, it was like this woman climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Like she's seen the face of God. She just you could tell this was not just I would say now, not just an academic subject. She really believed this. Now, I didn't have to deal with the topic then. So this is about 4th, 5th grade. I didn't have to deal with the topic of, say, gay marriage. But at the time in our culture, abortion, maybe birth control. And so these topics are coming up. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I don't mean to embarrass my parents or these wonderful teachers, sisters who taught me. In all sincerity, I'm in 4th, 5th grade. I didn't know the church had teachings. And then when I found out the church had teachings, I'm like, wow, I don't agree with that. I'm glad the Pope believes that. I mean, I don't believe that, but I'm a Catholic, And so I think in my mind as a grade school kid, I wouldn't have had this vocabulary, but I would have said, well, they're kind of the fundamentalists. I mean, I know these are the official teachings, but come on, nobody believes this stuff. And she taught us really well because she knew she's presenting us with the truth. And she was clearly conveying, once you know the truth, you have to follow it. It's not optional. So I remember she's planting these seeds, particularly about the topic of abortion. And so I'm sitting here saying, wow, okay, so as a Catholic, I can't support abortion. And my first frame of mind is when you hear the term pro-choice, that just seemed, again, I'm just firmly convinced, kind of hinting to your question, that people are products of a culture. And the church lost the culture a long time ago. So people are when people come to our parishes, when they come to our schools, our religious ed programs, they're coming from a culture, good or ill, they're formed. And then we are often charged with the challenge of trying to evangelize them, inform them. So here I'm this kid, and I'm going, well, it seems logical. Of course, who wouldn't be pro-choice? But then she's explaining, well, okay, this is a life, and we can't kill that life. And she wasn't browbeating us, and she wasn't like just hitting us over the head. She broke it down in categories we could understand. But it was challenging. And so then I'm thinking, well, okay, but you got to have exceptions. So then, she in appropriate language worked through the question of like rape or incest. Is it still a life? And I was really wrestling with that. So then I was thinking, well, okay, I can sort of get that, this is a child and we have to defend all life. But then I'm like, we need more birth control, because if we had more birth control, people wouldn't have these abortions. So then it was wrestling with the topic of contraception. And then the more you read about this, you're like, okay, well, abortion often is a backup contraceptive. And, so you're working through these issues and you're just finding yourself in this kind of uncomfortable place, which I'd never thought about before. So in a formative way, you're never getting an easy answer from me. The experience was that parish in Fairfax. And I, looking back, would say I was a material heretic. I didn't understand the church. I did not have what we would say a relationship with God. And I know for a lot of people, that's a weird set of terms. They don't know what that means anyways. And so I didn't really pray other than formal things. But I was confirmed then by Bishop Keating. And then we moved out to Washington State. And then I'm in this Jesuit high school. And then there was another series of very impactful friendships, buddies that I played football with in high school. And then a family. Kate was my classmate, and her mom was on the board of the National March for Life with Nellie Gray, and she ran the Washington State March for Life. This is Kathy McEntee, and our daughter Kate. Other kids were in school with me. So when I got to Washington, the seeds that were planted in this formation process, because remember, I got confirmed, and like as a pastor now, I see kids get confirmed, and then like they leave. And this was me. I got confirmed, and I'm like, I have this crisis of faith, and I'm like, do I believe in God? And do I want to even be Catholic anymore? And then I got to Washington, and through these friendships, I met these really fun Catholics. If I could get them on today with you, you would just die. They're so much fun. And they lived the faith. They had 6 kids. They're clearly involved with pro-life movement. We didn't have YouTube at the time, but they're introducing me all these. I'm reading all this stuff, and there's this conversion going on. And then I started going to some Marian conferences at the time. I was reading about apparitions. I went on a couple of retreats. A lot of times you hear Sister Miriam James, and she talks about this priest who had this big impact on her life and her vocation. Well, that priest, Father Pinto, would come up to the Northwest, and he would do retreats for families and youth. And so I went on a couple of retreats with him. And that, again, had a big impact on getting me back into the faith. And then there's this whole hilarious story of coming to Christendom.
Okay.
So
before we get into the Christendom story, so you mentioned that you were kind of a materialist, heretic.
I mean, I would say that now.
Right.
I didn't think of myself
Not
that way.
then.
Right.
What caused you, so if you were growing up in a primarily Catholic household, even though your dad wasn't Catholic, he would
go to, I don't remember what age I realized my dad wasn't Catholic.
Right.
We went to Mass all together as a family every week.
Okay, and he supported your mom and all the Catholic traditions.
1,000%, yeah.
So what caused you to be more, I guess, liberal, or more like, not, I wouldn't, maybe liberal is not even the right word, but just unorthodox? If you were receiving Catholic education through schools, you were living the Catholic life for all intents and purposes. So is that just friend pressure, or friends who were yeah, you're Catholic, but like Catholics, but like abortion's okay, and you just kind of bought into that, or what? Like, what was the pressure? I hadn't thought about it. I mean,
again, on some level, I mean, the data shows that the parental impact on kids is the biggest impact. So Christian Smith, who's a sociologist at Notre Dame, has done a ton of research on youth evangelization and all these kinds of things. So basically, the kids are going to be somewhat of an image of the parents. They're going to reflect the lived experience. So my parents had a living faith. The faith was part of our life. My dad was engaged. He went to Mass with us. So, I think my mom is reflected earlier on when they were first married and we came along. My dad wasn't necessarily going to Mass with us, but she said to him, I need you to come to Mass. I don't want to be the only one bringing the kids to Mass. And so he came. And my dad is an amazing guy. And he grew up with an amazing family. My grandparents, my dad's side of the family, both sides are amazing. But he didn't have a custom of going to church. So he had to learn that. And then, but the faith was present. Both parents practiced it. Church was important. Did we talk about the doctrines of the faith? No, we didn't. But we had Catholic culture insofar in the 1980s in a military family moving around. Yes, we had our little internal family culture. So again, and of course I was free to disagree with you. I tend to think people are the product in many ways of the culture in which they're raised. And I think at the time, if you were to look at extended family or other people, they would consider us conservative. We went to Mass every week. Parochial schools were a priority. We were very involved with our parish life. We supported different ministries. So from the outside, it looks there. But Aquinas says that the message is received in the manner of the recipient. It was probably just likely that when I had catechism class as a little kid up through 3rd grade, whatever, maybe I didn't have a good attention span. I just don't remember. I remember prayers. I remember going to Mass. I remember, getting ready for First Communion, confession. But then, I'm sitting, maybe it was because I was in the public school. I mean, we weren't talking about particular moral crises or issues a lot as 4th graders. But right. So I think part of it was I was suddenly just becoming cognizant of the fact that there were these heavier issues. And this teacher, in a very appropriate way, was trying to form our conscience and get us to realize that there is a Catholic position. It's based on the truth, if you will, and that we needed to understand that and live by it. So, of course, I think she was very realistic. She knew we might question this or push back. So she wasn't just hitting us over the head with it, but she was clearly challenging us. And so I just think that to a certain extent, I don't remember having conversations as a kid about abortion. I remember that my parents, and particularly my dad, was interested in politics, and he would follow that. I mean, as far as I paid attention to that as a kid. And I knew, that planted the seeds of the pro-life thing, because I would read some of these publications my dad would get, and there would be issues about pro-life and stuff, and I was being challenged by my teacher. So I think if you look at a kid who's children who are coming through your sacramental prep program, whether it's in they're homeschooled or in public school and religious ed or in the parochial school, you're getting these benchmarks. You're trying to prepare them. We're going to do your first penance, and we're trying to prepare them for that. And they have all these great questions. And, it's one thing you wish you could kind of break the seal about the confessional, about first confessions, because they're just awesome. You just see the kid's personality come out, and it's just great. It's beautiful to be a minister of mercy and watch a kid come in, and you want them to have a positive experience as much as possible. This is not traumatic. So anyways, but so then, now they're in third, fourth grade. And so you're talking to them, and, now that you can see that the thought process, the reasoning process is really kicking in. Well, what about this? Why do this? I remember one time saying to third graders, well, you're not married. Why? Technically, I'm married to the church. So one kid goes, oh, do you kiss the building, the bricks? And they all were giggling at that, so they're starting to wrestle with concepts. And so I think my conscience is just awakening as a kid. And our parents were very intentional about not letting watch a lot of television. They were careful about the media we consumed, and we weren't allowed to see bad movies and shows. So I just think in some way, I was getting some cues broadly from the culture. I didn't understand what abortion was at the time. I wasn't thinking about contraception. But so I just think, again, to some extent or another, you're going to be formed by the time you turn the culture you're living in, and that's going to have an impact. Now, the stronger impact, if I could say that, really was my parents and the practice. So I just think I was picking it up, and it makes me as a priest very sympathetic, because a lot of times people say, oh, wow, you're a priest and you were a Catholic and you're conservative. The presumption is you must be very critical or judgmental of other people. And I want to say, here's my bio. I was on the other side of the pew. I didn't understand the faith. And I remember as a kid, now granted, I don't know other people's parish experiences, but as a child thinking, I'm getting into middle school. I'm preparing for confirmation. All the kids in my prep classes who are Catholic don't seem interested in getting confirmed. I'm in public school at the time, and all the kids who I knew who were interested in Jesus were in Young Life, and so there was this ministry, which again, to me remotely was very appealing. Like, these people seem to believe in something. I was going through a religious ed program. I had great formators, and a couple of the kids were engaged, but a good number of them were just there because they had to be, and so I'm thinking, okay, well, what do I want to do? My peer group, the people that I'm seeing who are engaged are like, for lack of a better term, Protestants or evangelicals in the public school. So this begins this whole process. So I think on some level, I had a good foundation from the practice and example of my parents. The faith was inculcated into my life by practice. And as I began to think about things, I was starting to wrestle with stuff. And it took time for me to wrestle with, grapple with, and understand the truths of the faith. And it was always coming to the truths of the faith. Mm-hmm. The church was always winning. It wasn't having this major rebellion. It was just like, I was seeing that everything I was being told, like, you sit there and say, it's an understandable argument to present to someone when a woman is violated and a child is conceived in a violent act of rape or incest. Of course you're saying, how can we take care of her? But then you see interviews with people who were conceived in an act of rape or incest. And suddenly I'm going like, wow, this, woman gets up, a person gets up and gives a talk. I was a product of this horrible situation, but I'm looking at this person, they have value, they have dignity. So, you're just wrestling with this and realizing kind of by this process, you're coming to confirm the intellectual proposition of the truth of the faith, that life is life and it's true and we have to defend it. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
So from there, you went to the Jesuit school?
Yes. So then I went to Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma. My dad had grown up in Washington. He went to South Kitsap High School in the Puget Sound, Port Orchard, overlooking Bremerton shipyards, naval shipyards. And his school was a big football powerhouse for many, many years. And one of their rivals, interesting, in the league, they would play Bellarmine. And my dad remembers growing up hearing about this mighty Jesuit powerhouse, the scholastic methods or Socratic method, all this kind of stuff. My dad's very interested in education. So he was really happy when we moved to Fort Lewis that I could go to Bellarmine. And so went there, and I'm having this crisis of faith. I've just been confirmed. I'm really wondering if I want to stay Catholic. I have to admit, I was really drawn by evangelicals. I would also watch Mother Angelica on TV, but I found, like my CCD teacher, when I would see a testimony of someone who said how God had acted in their life, I was like, whoa, there's something different here. This person really believes that God is real and God is alive and that you can know him. And so then I get to Washington, and this is a great school, and I, still in contact with my buddies from there over the years. And so I'm forming friendships. I'm excited to be there. It's neat for me as an Army brat because all of my relatives live in Washington State generally. So my grandparents who are still alive, my aunts, uncles, cousins, it was like, we're always moving around. Now I'm back home in a certain sense. Mm-hmm. And it was a great experience. And then I met the McEntees, and then I got to know them. And it wasn't just like, wow, this is a really pro-life family. This is a really fun family. You just like to hang out with them. Just loads of fun. Mm-hmm. You can hear it's like Good Time Charlie with Father Lundberg. So, but then they were also super Catholic. Every corner of their house had a statue of Our Lady or the Sacred Heart, and she was involved with all these cool pro-life activities around the country. And so this gave me a chance. Now I'm really wrestling with these topics, and I start asking a bunch of questions. And so I'm having this deeper conversion. And then I learned about Christendom.
What was your first exposure to Christendom, or when did you first hear about it?
I was talking to Mrs. McEntee at one point I was picking her brain about a lot of different topics. I'd like to go out and hang out with her daughters too and the rest of the family, but still, she was a very enjoyable, larger-than-life personality, very loving lady. May she rest in peace. And so, and they were at my ordination, which was great. But so, I'm starting to really dive into the faith. I'm reading stuff. I'm asking questions. I'm starting to pray the rosary. I hate Lent. I don't like sacrifice. So when you're I'm going to pray the rosary for Lent because that'll be like having your kidneys taken out. So I can eat chocolate. It won't be a problem. But I'm trying to get a win-win here. Right. So I started praying the rosary, which was the total downfall.
Yeah, one bite of chocolate per Hail Mary.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I started praying the rosary, and there was a woman in the school, Miss Roth, or Miss Ross. She was a teacher, and she had gone to Medjugorje, and she put up signs around the schools for Lent. Come to the chapel during lunch and say the rosary. I thought, great. I don't really know how to say the rosary because growing up, my mom would always want me to pray with her, but I wouldn't do it. And so then, excuse me. So then I went to the chapel the first day, and I look in the chapel, and there she is with like 3 old ladies. And I'm playing football, and I don't want to be hanging out with a bunch of old ladies in the chapel. I'm sorry. It wasn't really a chivalrous moment. So then I go back, and the next day I'm like, well, I really should give this another try because I don't want to actually have to do real penance. So I go back to the chapel. She's the only one there. I go in and I told her that I didn't come yesterday. I'm sorry. And she said, well, I told God this morning, if he didn't send me at least one student, I'm dropping this lunchtime rosary. Well, I was her one student. So I come pray the rosary. Like one time, this is betrayal of my total ignorance. She had to go to a faculty meeting, so I'm in the chapel by myself at lunch, and I'm praying the rosary, and I kind of turn it into like the way of the cross. I was very confused at the time. So I started praying the rosary, and Our Lady, of course, takes over, and so you're totally doomed because she's going to get you. And so I'm starting to think more about the faith. I had no desire to go to a Catholic college. I had done well in the SATs, and I was thinking either of going. I had 3 schools I went to, either Princeton or UVA or Tulane, But then I asked my friend, her mom, I said, I realized that not all Catholic colleges were vibrant in the faith anymore. I understood that there had been kind of this crisis in recent decades. I said, are there still some good colleges who are really strong? And she said, yeah. She said, there's Thomas Aquinas College in California in Ojai. She says, there's Franciscan University Steubenville. And she said, and there's one in Front Royal, Virginia, but I can't remember the name of it. And I was like... No. I said, I lived in Fairfax County. Front Royal is a bunch of rednecks. There is no Catholic college in Front Royal, Virginia. I'm sure of that. Okay. So then I had a friend who was going through a crisis at the time, and we were talking, and she was a very devout believer. She was not Catholic, but she was praying about everything. And at one point I said, we're going to go to college. She goes, well, I'm praying about that. And I was like, oh, it's like a novel concept. So I'm like, I guess I should pray about that too, you know. And at the high school, they had a guidance office with view books from different colleges and universities, different states. And I would always pull out the UVA book. My sister was at UVA at the time. And I really was thinking of going there. And one day I noticed this one book with nothing written on the spine, and I pulled it out in the Virginia section, and it was for Christendom. Now, at this point, intellectually, like I'm kind of reading, I'm in high school, Dawson, Chesterton, you know, smattering of Catholic things. And I'm opening this book and I'm like, wow, the intellectual vision of this school is everything that I've been diving into the last couple of years. It sounds really amazing. And I'm sort of an intuitive person, I guess. And I was like, I think I really want to go here. So I come home, tell my dad, he's the PAO at Fort Lewis, and it's Desert Storm and all this stuff's going down. And I tell my friends, I'm going to go to Christendom College. Where's that? Front Royal, Virginia. How big is it? 160 kids. And like my dad's like, is it even accredited? I said, full 10 years. You know, I looked it up. And so I begin this year of convincing my parents, I'm going to Christendom. So Dr. Federico, who was president at the time, came out on a fundraising visit to Washington. We went to hear his talk. A guy who was on the board for Christendom, who worked on Capitol Hill, came out and gave a talk on issues in the church. I mean, I'm such a nerd. I'm going to this with my parents. And so I'm reading this stuff. My father, who's, you know, again, active duty military, went back to the Pentagon on a TDY trip, rented a car, drove down to Front Royal, sat in on some classes, had lunch. In as much as Christendom could wine and dine somebody in 1990, they were doing it. He met Dr. Carroll, all this. So, you know, the toughest nut to crack, I guess. My dad was in favor of it. So then my sister is graduating from UVA in 92, and we fly out a couple days early. I'm a junior in high school at this point, wrapping up junior year. And we fly out for her graduation, and we come early to visit Front Royal. So it's like a Snickers commercial, your blood sugar's tanking. We fly like 6 hours from Seattle to Dulles, get our luggage, get the rental car, drive to Front Royal. No iPhones, no Google Maps. Couldn't find the place. We'd ask people, do you know where Christendom? It's like right over there, you know. So my first memory of Front Royal was a jacked up monster truck with a bunch of bubbas with their shirts off. I mean, and I'm like at this point, there is no way in God's green earth that
some
I'm
things
going
don't change.
School in this town. And I mean, and I feel like an idiot for all kinds of reasons. So we finally find the campus. We go on, school's out for the summer. This is 30 plus years ago. It wasn't super impressive to see at the time.
Yeah, what, like three or four buildings at
Yeah,
that
I mean,
point?
it kind of looked like a summer camp.
Yeah.
I mean, people will make fun of it now, but I mean, it's like, you know, Las Vegas compared to that. And so then now I'm dreading because we're going to go back to the motel. And my grandparents and my aunt had come out the day before. And this is my dad's family. And so they are amazing Lutherans who have no concept of Christendom College. And they had already come out, and we make fun of each other so much in our family. And I was just dreading getting crucified at the hotel. Like, you know, this podunk town, and what are you doing? So we go to the motel, and my aunt's like, you got to go to that, check out that school. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, they'd come out the day before. They walked around, visited people. And their context for colleges was University of Washington, Washington State University, big state schools, 20, 30,000 undergrad. And they had walked around, and my aunt wanted a Diet Coke. And so someone said, well, just take a left out of the school and go up the road to what's now the shore stop, but was Jiffy's. And so she went in to get a Diet Coke and left my grandparents in the rental car with the air conditioning running. And like 40 minutes later, she hadn't come out. And they go inside, and she's talking to the manager of Jiffy's, whoever that was, thank God for that person, who was selling her on the merits of Christendom education. And she was very impressed. And she is a school teacher. So we went back, and the next day, much to my chagrin, and we sat in a class with the new president, Dr. Tim O'Donnell, who was leading a group to Rome. That's the summer that they met John Paul. And I was really blown away by that lecture. So...
And what was his lecture on? This was like to prospective students?
No, this was a group that was going on pilgrimage to Rome. Before Christendom had a Rome campus.
Okay.
They would, I don't know if it was every year, but maybe every other year they would take a pilgrimage to Rome for a couple of weeks to go to Rome and Assisi. And
this is that video where they're all standing in a circle?
Yes, with John Paul.
Okay.
The famous moment where St. John Paul said to Dr. Carroll, Christendom is doing a great work for the church. And they had gone over, I think too, for the beatification or canonization, maybe of St. Claude de la Colombier, Margaret Mary's Alcock spiritual director. So So he was doing a lecture. There were a series of classes that those students were taking to prepare for the pilgrimage.
Okay.
So we just glommed onto that class. And so it was just a very impressive lecture. And you saw the passion, you saw these young people. Again, it's very impressive to see, like, here I am, I'm having this conversion as a teenager. I'm involved with school life. I'm involved with sports, whatever. And I have good friends and they come from good families, but not too many of them were particularly interested, if I could say, in the faith. It was a part of their life, but not a big priority.
Yeah. Was that pretty eye-opening to go to a place where it was small, which is probably very different from all the schools you had been to.
Right.
But then also like, oh, these people are like Catholic and actually are here for the faith and not just to get a degree in something. Yes.
I mean, on one level, I don't think I would have done well in a big school with a ton of people. It was good for me to be in a small school. But also, it was the friendships. I mean, I was loving the classes. You just emerged. I mean, the first month was kind of a challenge because Christendom is such a tight-knit community. If you're only 160 kids and you're the new guy, it's a little bit of a challenge. But, good classmates. But it's all these positive experiences of, the classroom, academics, the liturgical life, the sacramental life, dances, parties, events at the O'Donnells, bonfires, trips into DC. It was this full package, and it was nice not feeling the odd man out. Now you're not the only kid who's out of your high school who seems interested in the faith. And so I'm with kids my age, but not all these people are going to become priests and nuns. And at the time I had no desire to be a priest. So it was nice to find a place where you fit, where clearly you believe in God and other people believe in God, and you're going to mass and you're living the faith, but you're also having fun. Because I think a lot of times people put people in categories. Oh, you're super religious. Well, you can have a strong faith and be a normal person.
Yeah, yeah. So at what point I think you have to declare a major the end of sophomore year.
Yeah.
Did you go into it thinking, because presumably you understood what the liberal arts were, did you go into it thinking, I'm going to do history or did you just totally enroll because on a whim and had no idea what you were going to study?
Oh, no, I didn't go in with the idea what my major would be at the time, no.
Okay.
I mean, I understood, as a superficial sanguine person, the liberal arts and the value of liberal education, that we're going to be reading good stuff. Mm-hmm. And, we're going to have these great professors. But I wasn't settled. I decided on history, but I mean, I took a variety of classes. I remember going to Father Scaris, again, may he rest in peace, because I had enough credits to declare a double minor, whatever that meant. I had enough theology credits to do a theology minor and philosophy minor. But I chose history. And then Dr. Chris Bloom he was my thesis director and big mentor and impact at that point in my life.
So at what point during the Christendom time, or I guess at any point during the Christendom time, or during your time there, did you think about the priesthood, or was that the whole time you were at Christendom, it was just like, I'm at school, it's Catholic, I'm getting an education, we'll see what happens?
This goes back to the diabetes club, the cookies and Coke. So my CCD teacher at one point, where, this is the woman who spoke with authority, whatever she was talking about, and we're wrestling all these big issues. And one time we're talking about vocations, and this is the guy who served mass once and didn't ever go back. And she says, Bjorn, I think God might be calling you to be a priest. And I don't know, what is that game they used to have where you're trying to pull the bones out of the
operation?
Yeah. And, and if you don't get it right, like that, she hit a nerve. Because people ask all the time, I think it's pretty universal for priests.
Yeah.
Oh, when did you first want to be a priest? I think they think you're born, and then, one day when Our Lady appeared to me and I'm praying the rosary.
Right. Yeah, not everyone's Father Fasano.
Right, no, exactly. Yeah. Right, because exactly, it's Father Fasano. Great.
Like
I knew when I was, right,
his
6
first
months
word
old.
Was priest.
Yeah. I said Padre Pio. And so, he shows up later in the story. But, so here she says, okay, sorry. People ask you this, not romantic, but romantic notion of priesthood. When did you first know? And I think it's, Father Scalia at one point made the point, it's better to ask a guy, when did you first become aware, even in hindsight, of your vocation? And so it was like 5th grade. I'm not serving. I'm not thinking about this. She recognized something. And that's what it's really good. You don't want to drown kids or hit them over the head or intimidate them. But if you recognize something, don't be afraid to say, hey, have you ever thought about being a priest? And then they're going to have the reaction I did. No, I don't want that. But she hit a nerve. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I was joked from like Shakespeare, out, damn spot, for the rest of my life. Why did you ask me that question? Because it wouldn't go away. And I didn't have a context for guilt. Like my parents weren't like saying, oh, someday you should make the family proud and be a priest. My parents nobody was pushing it. But she observed something and she encouraged it. And I couldn't shake it. I mean, I was going in these circles like, well, if she's wrong, how come I can't convince myself that she's wrong? If she's right, why don't I want this? But something happened, and then I tried to bury it. So in high school, if it come up, do you want to be? No, I don't want to be a priest. And then in college, now there's all these great stories with that. But so yes, that's always in the background, and it's something I couldn't shake, and I tried to. So when people say, well, when did you first want to be a priest? I say about a month before I was ordained, But looking back, it was about 5th grade that I became aware of it, and I didn't understand it. So again, when you can expose, when your children are raised in an environment where they get to know priests, and being in the Diocese of Arlington, I mean, I met very many fine priests all over the place. But, being in the diocese, meeting young priests, because one of the things, it's kind of a funny story. Father Jack Riley, who helps basically run the retreat program at San Damiano, he was one of the chaplains at Christendom when I was graduating. And he was definitely trying to encourage me to think about the priesthood. And another priest, Father McLucas, had encouraged me to think about it. And so, and I was always trying to come up with an excuse. Like, well, basically the logic was, if God wanted me to be a priest, I'd want it. If God wanted me to be a priest, I would want to be a priest. I don't want to be a priest, hence God doesn't want me to be a priest. Yeah. And so he's encouraging me. And then I got this internship at Vatican Radio. And so he knew that. And so he said, well, when you're over in Rome, why don't you look up some of the Arlington seminarians? And, I was like, well, how am I going to do that? And he said, well, why don't you call up Father Scalia? He's newly ordained. He's at St. Bernadette's. I said, okay. So I called and left a voicemail. Hi, I get an answer, and he gave me contact information for then seminarian Chris Pollard, who was at the North American College. So while I was over there, I met him. Fast forward to 2020, I'm now pastor in Winchester, and Father Scalia is now the vicar for clergy. And I get a call one day saying, hey, Bjorn, give me a call. It's or whatever. So I call him back, and he says, well, you're getting another pro-vicar. I said, oh, who is it? Jack Riley. So, it's karma. No good deed goes unpunished. Yeah. So poor Father Riley encouraged the vocation, then he got stuck working for me, and I think he got out.
That's what happens when you do rosaries for Lent, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It always comes back to get you. Right. How did you get the internship at Vatican Radio?
So various career desires over the years, and I had some interest in politics. I liked being near D.C. when we were at Christendom. And so in 1995, St. John Paul comes to the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, whatever. And Sean Patrick Lovett, who ran at the time the English language section at Vatican Radio, is good friends with the O'Donnells. Mm-hmm. And when they were in Rome at the Angelica studying, they knew Sean. So he came with the press entourage for John Paul on this American trip. And Dr. O'Donnell arranged for him to come to speak about his work in media, Catholic media, all this stuff. And my dad was a public affairs communications officer, so that was always in the background too. So he spoke at Christendom, and he even kind of alluded to he'd be interested in having maybe potentially Christendom students intern at Vatican Radio. And that just sparked. I thought, wow, that would be amazing. I was interested in communications. And so I talked to him, and he said, well, if you want to come, you need to have some internship or maybe some background with journalism or media. So the summer of my junior year, and in between junior year and senior year, I interned in Washington, D.C. for a think tank that had a media program. So I interned there. And then during the senior year, I wrote a letter. There wasn't a program, but I wrote to Sean Lovett asking to be considered for this internship. And then I heard back. So there wasn't, I don't know if they have a formal program now, but at the time I just asked.
Okay. And then, so after.
And what happened was my dad had retired. When I graduated high school and went to Christendom, my dad retired from 30 years in the Army. For a year, he didn't work. He was at home. And then he got a job with an American company that was providing satellite phone service for British soldiers serving as peacekeepers in Bosnia.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it was a unique job, and he was like a manager on site for the American company. He basically lived in tents with these soldiers. He was a kind of manager on point. And when he came back from that year, my parents, told us at Christmas that as a Christmas present, when I graduated, the whole family was going to go with the O'Donnells on the Christendom trip in '97 to Rome and Assisi. And so it piggybacked on that. We went for 2 weeks, and when that ended, I stayed for the summer.
Stayed. And is that when, I remember your parents telling me this story several years back, probably 5 years ago. Your mom had reached out to me through the parish and wanted some help detailing her car or cleaning it or I don't know, something like that. And then afterwards, they paid me, and then she told me part of the story. I don't know if I got the whole story, but your dad he was still Lutheran at the time,
yes,
right? And he met John Paul II,
yes.
But it was kind of a whim.
It was great.
So yeah, what was that story?
So we're over there, and the priest on our trip was now Monsignor Saunders, Bill Saunders, who's the pastor of St. Agnes in Arlington. And John Heisler was a deacon, and he was in seminary, not John Paul Heisler, but his uncle. Mm-hmm. And so we're on this trip, and this trip was so much fun. It was so great. And so somehow through the O'Donnell's connections, we were going to the Wednesday audience, but we had 2 tickets to be up on the days near the Holy Father. And so they gave one to then Father Saunders. And then we had a raffle or a drawing to I forget exactly how it went, to who was going to get the other one. And the only person on the trip who wasn't Catholic was my dad. And he was the one who got the golden ticket. And then he at first no, I can't take this. I'm not Catholic. And I was like, no, you are taking it, and you're going to be the Pope, and you're going to become Catholic. So then he goes up there. And this is 97. It's so a different world now prior to 9/11. I've got old video camera footage from going over my little Sony Handycam. And here's my dad, and he's walking up and down the aisle. He's going up to Swiss guards. He's just working the room. Now, the security is much more intense, but he came to where we were down with the hoi polloi, and he's talking to us. And then he walks up, and I've got footage of him. He's talking to the Swiss guard and that Swiss guard, and he's going over here and he's waving at us. So there was a little bit, I don't want to say casual, but it was not as intensely post 9/11 world. But so he was up there, and I got footage of him going over with Bill Saunders to meet the Pope. And we have the video of it and a picture of it.
Did that make a big impact on him, or was that just like,
oh, it did.
Yeah, it was cool.
Sure. No.
Met the Pope, whatever.
Well, 2 things happened. We went over to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, for a lecture. By then, Monsignor Charles Brown, who's now like Archbishop Charles Brown, who's like the nuncio to Albania or something, or the Philippines. I forget where he is right now. But he was working at the now DDF. And he gave us history of the Holy Office and the work of the congregation. And he said, if we time it right and go out into the courtyard, we can meet Cardinal Ratzinger when he comes back from lunch or whatever it was. So we all run out there, and we're waiting. And here comes Cardinal Ratzinger. And my dad shook his hand, kissed his ring, and he kissed the ring of the Pope. And so, I was joking, met 2 popes.
Yeah.
Well, like one in potentia or whatever. So, no, both of them had a big impact on him. Yeah.
And how soon after that did he convert? Would you say that started kind of the conversion, or maybe sparked a thought that had already been there for a long time? Or
it was a spark in a process that was already underway. He was talking about it all over the years. This was 97, and he came into the church in 2011. So it's still about another 14, 15 years. Because he had talked about it. He said, I think someday I'll probably become Catholic, and he would talk about it. And, on one level, you're trying to figure out, was there a particular thing holding you back or whatever? But, provoking or prodding didn't seem to work. And he was, when they retired from Fort Lewis, they ended up joining a parish in Tacoma, Saints Peter and Paul, and got really involved there. And the pastor there, Father Peter, was again trying to evangelize my dad. So he gave him jobs. He made him an usher, and they had still kind of an old school bell that you'd ring with a rope, and he had him ring the bell and all this stuff. And he was working him that way. But then one of the kids, friends of our family, said to my dad, it must have been 2009 or 10 or 11, whatever. He says, would you be my confirmation sponsor? And I said, sparked on that. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And so my mom's like, John, you can't be the confirmation sponsor. You're Lutheran. Or, you have to be Catholic. And he says, oh. And then what happened was we had a wonderful priest friend, Father Louis Ledoux. He'd been a military chaplain. He'd served in Vietnam. I mean, we knew him in retirement. Just a great guy. He would do holy hours we would go to. And my dad started going privately to take instruction with him. He lived about 15 minutes from where my parents lived. So without telling my mom, he was going for instruction. And then my last grandfather, my mom's dad, had died. And I flew out for his funeral. And then not long after that, the process, they got really active looking to move back to Virginia. Because once their decision was basically, once there was none of their parents were alive, they were going to move back to be near their grandkids. Mm-hmm. They didn't know where I would be. So they wanted to be in Northern Virginia. They were leaning towards Front Royal. They didn't want to be inside the Beltway. And so, but they moved out. And right before they moved out, I flew out and I received my dad into the church. Wow. And I confirmed him and gave him his first communion.
That's awesome.
So it was really neat.
Full circle.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So after that, if I'm getting the chronology right, you went to EWTN after Christendom. How did that happen?
So 1993, I graduated from Bellarmine, and I've now decided, and I applied to Christendom. I got accepted. And then I'm going to World Youth Day.
Okay, right.
In Denver.
One of the 6. This is the first one?
The first of the great purgatories, right?
Yeah. Dante's. Yeah.
The 6 layers of World Youth Day. And they got better every time. Yeah. So, but I was in a group, the Youth for Militia Immaculata. Youth Militia Immaculata. It was a youth version of like a Maximilian Kolbe prayer group. So there was a parish, St. Joe's in Tacoma. And I would go there in high school. As I was having this deeper conversion, I found this group, and I would go there. And one of the chaperones of the group, Karen Peretti, she was with Jerry Pettit. The two of them were the chaperones. Jerry's grandson is now my parishioner in Sacred Heart of Winchester. That's a whole wild story.
That's great.
So Karen, her husband was Art Peretti, and he was the West Coast marketing rep for EWTN. So when we went to Denver, we kind of had a little access to more stuff. I don't recall if we met Mother then.
Okay.
But we went out there, and I knew he worked at EWTN, and that was really cool, and that was part of that. And then I had that DC internship in view of going to apply for the Rome thing. And then when I knew I had the Rome internship, I'm trying to think, what am I going to do for a job? So I called up Mr. Peretti, and I talked to him, and he put me in contact with Mr. Wegemer, who at the time, I have to double check, I don't know if he still is, was the East Coast, or he was the vice president for marketing for the network. So I met him for lunch, and he said that they had a job opening, but it was in marketing. And he said, if you go to that internship in Rome, that will be filled when you get back, before you go. And I was, I'm stupid 22-year-old, like, well, I want to go to Rome, so I'll find another job. So I came back, and then I called him, and I knew the job had been filled. And I said, do you know if there are any other openings? And he checked, and he said there was an entry-level job in production, in TV production, at the network. And I said, who do I need to talk to? So I started the process of applying for that. And so I went down for my first interview. I met with the big gunness down there. And then they said, well, we think we're going to offer you a job, but if we do, you have to come back and you have to interview with Mother. I said, well, of course, So then...
Happy to.
I know, right, exactly. Yeah. So when I came back from Rome, temporarily I was working at Christendom for the summer. I was working for John Siskanik. I don't think I really did much for him, but I was working for John.
But you were getting paid.
Right, exactly. He was very charitable. So then I go back for the second interview. I go down there, and it was like meeting the Godfather. So, Mother's in the cloister, but she'd come over, for network business occasionally, not all the time. And there were times she'd have office hours. So they said, we're going to go in and you're going to meet her. Okay. So I go in the room, and so she's there. And then these other top people are there. I mean, just a handful of us. And so I'm like, kid. And she goes, so you want to work here? And I'm like, oh, yes. Well, first I said, I bring greetings from like 500 people in Front Royal, Virginia. Oh, that's awesome.
Did she know about Christendom at that time?
She did, yeah. And so then she said, well, you're going to learn a lot working here. And that was kind of it. Like, I felt like I should kiss her toe or whatever,
Yeah.
But then I backed out of the room. Okay. It wasn't a super long interview.
Right.
But it was really neat. And then the second year I was there, I was producing The Journey Home, which is Marcus Grote's show. And so that was on Friday night at the time. And then one time for 2 weeks, Chris Harrington, who was Mother's producer, was going to be out of town. And so she said, they asked me if I would produce Mother's show for 2 weeks. I was kind of terrified, but I'm like, okay.
I'll have to look up those two shows.
Yeah, right, exactly. They've stripped from the catalog. And so then Chris said to me, she said, Tuesday night Mother would just kind of riff on topics, and Wednesday she'd have a guest, if I remember that order correctly. It could be wrong. And so I said, what's she going to talk about this week? She says, well, it kind of goes with what Mother feels led to do. She said last week she was talking about this booklet she had on the Trinity. So the order of sequence is she's going to come out of the convent to this one area, and you're going to meet her in the hallway and talk to her. And then she prays with all the crew, and then she goes out. So she comes out, and I was like, hi, Mother. She'd see me around, even she knew I worked there. And so I said, I'm producing this week for Chris. I said, are you going to be, last week you were talking about the Trinity. Are you going to talk about this week? Oh, no, honey, we're all done with that. And I said, okay. What would you like?
I've said everything I need to say about the infinite mystery.
Right. So then I said, do you know what you'd like to talk about today? He goes, I don't know. What should I talk about? I was not helpful. She goes, some help you are. And she walks off. And I'm like, this is a total face plant from the beginning. So anyway, we pray in a group with the staff, the crew, whatever. And then the producers, you're in the control room. So you've got the director up front. You've got the sound guy over next door. You've got these various people, and they're doing this was 2 million years ago. And I'm just sort of sitting there, and I'm sort of like, you're the production manager, if you will. So the show's going, and then the bat phone rings. And they're like, you pick that up. I said, okay. I said, hello. It's one of the sisters calling from the convent. And they said, Mother's wimple is not affixed properly. It's not on correctly. Something's unsnapped or something. I'm like, okay. It's just,
or what, are you going to come over and fix it?
Is there an action item for me? What do I do? Well, you're going to need to let her know. I'm like, okay, thank you, sister. Click. So then I'm to the crew, I'm like, okay, her wimple's not on right. What am I supposed to do? And they're like, type a message in the teleprompter saying, technical difficulties, go to a break. So I type in, so then she's like, well, we're having some technical difficulties. We'll be back in just a minute. So then I have to run out into the studio, and she's got her fans there. And I go up to her and I said, Sister so-and-so called, and your wimple's not attached properly. She goes, that's it. I thought we blew a tube or something. So I'm I run away again because I'm already the agent of disaster here. So I go back so whatever, she fixed her, she had to fix. We go back. So fine. So then the show continues. No more. We don't burn anything down. So then afterwards, it was interesting. I don't know what for people who follow EWTN, what they would have thought. But Mother really didn't like being the center of attention. But she knew for the pilgrims who came to the network and who visited, it was really important to be present to them. So after the show, she would be available and they would talk to her and stuff. And this is, this is 99. And so Y2K is on the horizon. And Mother was really into Y2K because she thought God was going to do this big reset, we're going to be riding horse and buggy thing. And she saw the problems in the world and kind of was like, okay, this apocalyptic thing. And so anyway, so we're out there. And so she's got these couple security guards, if you will, bodyguards who are with her to kind of just help her navigate the crowd. And this was prior to her healing. I was there too when she got healed. I was at the network at the time. And so this woman comes up to her and she says, Mother, I brought this for you. It's the Y2K bug. And it was a plushie. It was this little stuffed animal with googly eyes, and it said Y2K bug. And she, oh, thank you. So she takes it, and then as we're leaving the studio, she goes, honey, this is for you. And she gives it to me. So my relic of Mother Angelica is a stuffed animal. But so we survived that. But and then
I assume you don't let people venerate that.
No, something I got to pull that out, right? When she's declared blessed or something. This is the holy relic, the holy bug of Antioch. So but so it was amazing. She was an amazing person, and it was really cool to be at the network.
So you produced those. It was the 2 weeks.
So for the first year,
you had her show specifically.
The first year, I was associate producer the whole time officially. Okay. And the first year, I would produce series. So if Anthony Criste is coming down to do the Doing Virtue show, the way this would work is I would talk to you in advance, and get all your input and stuff about what you want to do. And if I had been an organized person, I would have prepared all the screen graphics and everything in advance, and we would go live to tape. And we would tape everything and pull up your lower thirds and roll in any video or B-roll you wanted and do all this stuff. But generally what I would do is we would just tape you, and then I'd get in an editing suite with an editor, and we'd add all that in after the fact. But so you'd come down and typically tape maybe 14, 15, 16 episodes in a week.
Okay.
So 3 or 4 a day, 1 or 2 in the morning, 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And then as a producer, I'm a project manager, and I got to just see it through to completion. And that would mean doing all the editing we had to do with the sound and the titles and all that. And then that would get put into rotation for whenever it's going to be a broadcast. And so I worked on different series. I worked on Web of Faith. I mean, no one's going to know this stuff. They used to joke that EWTN either meant Elderly Women's Television Network or elderly people who didn't like Mother, elderly women talking nonsense, But so, I mean, Bob and Penny Lord, Father Andrew Apostoli, I worked on the show at the time, The Abundant Life with Janet Bankovic. So it was neat. It was a neat experience. I got to go with Dr. Donald to Rome, and we filmed his series on the Lenten stational churches, Rome's hidden churches. Oh, okay. And we were there in Rome when Bishop Keating died. They were supposed to have dinner with him. And so we were at the North American College that Sunday, and Dr. Donald was filming his intro segments to all 40 some of these church videos. And I'm like, well, the camera guy's there, the producer is there, the director. I'm like, I haven't gone to Mass yet. I said, I'm going to go to Mass and then I'll come back. So I go into Mass, and Archbishop Donahue from Atlanta at the time came out to celebrate the Mass. And he began the Mass by saying, I wish to express my condolences on behalf of all of us here to the seminarians on the Diocese of Arlington on behalf of us on the death of your Bishop Keating. I'm like, what? So that he had died,
wow. Okay.
The night before. And so it was totally wild, and then, so anyway, so we got to film that. And then it was basically about after a year that they asked me if I would take over producing The Journey Home. Okay. So that meant it was a live show every Friday. And there was a number of crew and staff, people working at the network, my age at the time, early 20s. And we had a little gaggle of friends who would hang out. So we'd go to the show, produce the show, and then we'd go out to dinner.
Nice.
And have a good group of friends.
So you enjoyed your time there?
Very much so. Very much so. It was fun. And I was there when Mother was building her new monastery. Mm-hmm. And so that was a neat project. That's an hour north in Hanceville, but she had this whole vision to do this. And then, there was all this controversy at the time. There was all this drama going on about that. But it was, as a 23-year-old, it was neat to be working there and to see that being built, this beautiful shrine. And then the problem was, again, back to the vocation, which was, I was still thinking about the priesthood. I'm trying to discern, and I don't want to do it. So then I'm like, well, I'd like to get married. I want to have a family. So I thought I probably should go to graduate school. I didn't think I could continue working at EWTN because I didn't think I could support a family. So I moved back up here. I lived with friends. That's a whole story in itself. But I studied for the LSAT and took the LSAT with some friends who then I got accepted, did okay. I didn't do great, but I did okay. And then got accepted to law school. At the same time, decided to apply to the seminary. Okay. So,
are you good to keep going? Do you want to take a break?
I'm fine. Yes, we can keep going.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just keep rolling. Yeah. So you toyed with the idea of law school. What made you switch and go to the seminary? Was that?
Well, I didn't really want to be a lawyer.
Okay.
But
process of elimination.
No, that wasn't the factor. Okay. But to all my lawyer friends out there, you do great work, and please help us. No, I was desperate to find something, like Jennifer Fulwiler has this book, Something Other Than God. Mm-hmm. I'm not running from God in a sense. I'm praying, I'm living a spiritual life, but I don't know where I'm going to fit in this picture. I have this fear, like anybody, of surrendering to God and saying yes. And so I'm like, well, I don't know what I want to do, and I know what I don't really want to do. So I guess I'll just try the law school gig, and we'll see. I don't really particularly want to get an MBA. I guess I'm more inclined to a legal degree or whatever, law degree. So I take the LSAT. I got accepted to Ave Maria, and at the same time, a series of things happened. My best friend from high school was getting married, and he wanted to be one of his groomsmen, and so I'm flying out, and Father Gould, who had been was the vocation director at the time, he would come down to EWTN, and I had seen him through that. And I had talked to him, but when I would talk to him, I would just basically talk myself out of being a priest in his presence. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he wouldn't push it a lot. Father, I think good vocation directors know, like, we're not going to beg you and hold your hand. You've got to want this. And even if you're afraid and you got to take the leap, he had a good sixth sense about trying to help guys discern. So I had talked to him, but then I don't know, I forget what it was, but I saw him and I said, oh, I'm going out to Seattle for my buddy's wedding. He says, well, hey, why don't you fly to BWI and you can go stay at the Mount and go see Ben Akers. So Ben Akers was someone I knew from Christendom, and at the time he was in the seminary. And then, so I said, all right, because I didn't want to go near a seminary because I was afraid you're going to get like sucked in and put a bag over your head and they'd ordain you or something.
Right.
So he was at the Mount. So I got a hold of him, and Father Jerome Magat, who's a priest of our diocese, but who's now working out in San Francisco, he's vice rector at the seminary. He was there at the time, some other guys I knew. So I stayed there overnight. And again, this was this fascinating thing. When I was in Rome interning, and when I met the future Father Pollard, and I went to the NAC, and I would meet seminarians, it was this intriguing reality. It was, why are these guys giving everything up? Why can they do this and I'm afraid to do this? You know, in my head, I had this weird, this cycle that was going through my head. Those guys are great. I'm glad they're becoming priests. If I was going to be a priest, which I'm not, I'd want to be like him. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to be a priest. So I'm glad they're doing it. But at least I could kind of visualize the thought, like, here's somebody who I could admire and look up to, who's taking this leap, you know, because you have all these rationale in your head. Well, just why, a million reasons why you think you don't want to be a priest. And again, I got to stress, a vocation, everyone has a vocation. Everyone has a unique individual calling. So before I would have thought, not that, just these guys had nothing else to do. So they just said, why not? No, I mean, now in hindsight, I realize, everyone's going through this wrestling period. But so when I would meet these guys, I'd like, wow, that's really admirable. So anyway, so I went to the Mount. I spent the night there. I hung out with Ben and Father Magat and their friends. We went out to Friendly's and had ice cream. And again, it was just this intriguing thing. There was something intangible being there. I kind of felt at home, which was terrifying me. And I was like, and then Ben really shared with me, he opened up about his discernment and his struggles. And I always give him a hard time because then I went into the seminary and then he left and got married. I said, he had to find a replacement or something.
Yeah. He was just recruiting.
Right. Totally. Yeah. He was getting like sales bonuses or something. So, so a very nice visit, went really well. Again, it's really admirable to see guys praying together as brothers in the chapel and seeing the joy. Again, these guys have joy. They're happy. They're not miserable. They're not going around like lemon suckers, miserable, like, oh, I got to do God's will, So that was fun. And then I fly to Seattle. I had this great time at the wedding. It was great seeing my best friend from high school at the time, get married. And then I'm flying back. And I have this knot in the pit of my stomach the whole time, like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Why are these guys happy doing this? Why am I not happy at that prospect? It wasn't literally this way, but like, if I don't become a priest, I'm going to go to hell, all this drama. So then I had to get some job interviews. I was doing some job interviews because I needed some work for the summer before going off to school, ostensibly. And so I had this interview, which doesn't exist anymore, at MCI WorldCom, a big phone company that's no longer around, out in Ashburn. They had this huge campus. And so I got this interview and I'm meeting with a guy and I'm talking and then he says, well, what do you want to do? At some point. I said, well, you want me to be honest? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to law school. I'm wrestling with the priesthood. I'm looking for work before I go off to school. And he's like, he says, we got a lot of lawyers. We need more priests. And he said, I don't know what he wasn't pushing, but he was saying, I would rule it out. So I'm like, oh, dang it. And so then I don't know how, if you probably don't, you're not immature. You don't do these things. I'm driving by the Chancery because of a job interview. And I decided I'm going to stop by the Chancery. It's in Arlington, right by Route 50 and Glebe. And I'm going to go in there. And if Father Gould is in his office, I'm going to take this as a sign that I should consider becoming a priest. And if Father Gould's not there, I'm never going to think this ever again. He's sending stupid
The problem's going to go away.
Right, from God. Like, he's like, here, hold my beer. Yeah. So I park. I'm walking into the Chancery. I physically run into Father Gould. I'm like,
he's not in the office.
Right.
Yeah.
Expletive insert. It's like, dang it. It's like, okay, fine. So then I said, Father, could we talk? And he said, yeah, Charlie Ho, come over to St. Agnes. So I go see him. We talk. I'm telling him about being a priest. That's great, and all this stuff. But so then he said, look, here he gave me some ideas. He says, go find 3 priests or go meet up with 3 priests that you respect and trust, and then come back and see me in 6 weeks. It was the Diocese of Arlington. Well, it was the Jubilee year, and they were having a big event. It was now, I think, Eagle Bank Arena at George Mason, but it used to be the Patriot Center. And so I said, okay, fine. So so then I did. I went and talked to Father Dennis Donahue. I talked to Father John Heisler, and I met with Father Fasano. Now, what is the name of the guy on Simpsons who's the boss? Excellent. Is it Smithers or whatever?
Sure.
Anyway, that guy.
Okay.
So anyways, I was like, Father Fasano, whenever he would come visit Christendom when I was a student there, I would go hide. I'd go to the library. Mm-hmm. Father Gould came for vocation day. I'd go to the library. I'd go hide. I didn't want to be around them. When they would have vocation weekend at Christendom and they'd have like free donuts, I wouldn't even go for the free donuts because like if I step into the commons, I'm going to get,
I'm going to somehow sign a form.
In a Borg or something. So I talked to the 3 of them. They gave me great advice. And so I go back for this mythical meeting with Father Gould. And so it's this big mass with Bishop Laverty at the Eagle Bank Arena. And I ran into Bishop Laverty. I'd never met him before. And he has this way of like piercing your soul when he looks at you like, oh, And so it's kind of like one of those things like, you should be a priest. I know you can't get away from him. And so I'm like, okay, hello, Bishop. And then, went to the mass. It was beautiful. And I met up with Father Gould afterwards. And again, he played, I don't know if he was playing dumb or he just didn't remember what he told me to do. But I said, well, hey, can I meet up with you? Yeah, well, come out to lunch. We're going to go out to lunch. So we go to this lunch and then some diner. And there was a priest from Africa. We're talking about motorcycles and all this stuff. And at one point, I'm like, Father Gould, can I talk? Yeah, come back to the parish. So we go back to the parish and I sit down and talk to him and I tell him I want to apply. And so then he said, oh, great. And so he gave me an application and then that started the process. And there was a whole series of blunders along the way. But one moment I always go back to when I wake up in the morning, my head starts spinning and I just start doing what I'm doing now, babbling all day long in my head. And I woke up one morning, it was really quiet, like this. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was like, heard God say, Bjorn, you can trust me. And that was the whole key of the problem, which is the key of every problem for everybody. As a pastor, as a priest, as anybody we all have a call from God, and we're all called to surrender our lives to him, and we're all terrified to do it for legitimate, understandable reasons. And so what I thought the priesthood was going to be, and what I thought, all the fears are being presented to you by the enemy or your own insecurities. And it was realizing, it is a big leap of faith. You're trusting God, and you're taking the next step. And sometimes you feel like you're going to throw up, and you're like, you want to just run for the hills. Where's the exit ramp? I want to get out of here. But it's, and you're not a lamb led to the slaughter. Our Lord gave his life for us, but you're in a process. And it's true, like Father Gould would have said, I don't know, other vocation directors handle it. Most of the discernment to a certain extent is really going to happen outside the seminary. But then there's further discernment within, the diocese, you're applying to the diocese, but the bishop has to figure out if he wants to ordain you, and there's all kinds of growth for the rest of your life. And there's a lot to learn. It's a whole process of growth on all these different levels. And so, and so it began.
Yeah. Before we get further into that, you had mentioned 10 minutes ago or so that you were at EWTN when Mother was healed.
Yes.
I remember my grandparents live, they used to live outside of Vienna in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And one weekend is probably, 15 years ago, we went to Canton where there was I think she's a servant of God. I can't remember her name, Lila something.
No, you're thinking Lila Rose. It's
okay. It's something. Is it something Rose?
Yeah, I have to look it up.
Okay,
but
anyway, we went to her house, and it was my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that Mother Angelica
met her
as a much younger mother in her youth. She met this older visionary, and I think the Christ child appeared to her. And there's a big vase of water that has a consecrated host that's been there for 50 years.
Rhoda Wise.
Yes. Okay. Sort of like Rose.
Yes. Well, she's connected with a little flower.
She had the stigmata. And
yes.
All of this stuff. Have you been there or no?
I have not. I'd like to go. But yeah, Mother's from Canton. And this woman was a convert. And she had gone into the hospital thinking if I recall this correctly, thinking she was pregnant, but she had this massive cyst. And, unfortunately she didn't have a child, and they had to do surgery and all this. And while she was in the hospital, the sisters, it was a Catholic hospital, cared for her. And I don't know if her mystical experiences began in the hospital, but the little flower appeared to her. But then she had ongoing health problems. And then she also, she converted, and she was having these mystical phenomena, allegedly. And then the little flower appeared to her at her home, I think, as well, purportedly, and that there was a chair that Jesus sat in her house.
Yep.
And so when Mother Angelica's dad abandoned her and her mom when she was a child, she was a child of divorce, grew up in a lot of stigma at the time in the Catholic neighborhood, and a lot of suffering. But then she had ptosis of the stomach. She had this,
something with her digestion system.
She had this complicated thing, and they had her in like these girders and belts and all this stuff, and it wasn't necessarily making progress. And then Mother Angelica's mother was inspired by a friend to go to Rhoda Wise. So they go see Rhoda Wise. Rhoda has Mother Rita Rizzo sit in the chair where Jesus allegedly sat, and gives her, I think, a novena to the little flower and tells her to pray. And at the end of the novena, she was healed. And so after that, she had this really profound conversion, and then her leading to entering. I don't know if she entered. She did not enter in Canton. She had to run away from Canton. Her mom didn't want her to go into the convent, so she went to Columbus, or another city in Ohio, where she entered the St. Paul Monastery shrine. And the Mother Superior at the shrine was a big devotee of Rhoda Wise also. Okay. And she would get messages that were allegedly dictated to Rhoda. And some of them even referred to Mother Angelica herself. So yes, Rhoda Wise, her cause is open. And I've never been there, but allegedly there's a host, purportedly a host in this container of water, and it hasn't dissolved.
Yeah, I forget how long it's been there, 50 years, something like that. But it's still at the bottom. When I was there, I think they'd let you take holy water and they just replenish it as long as it doesn't get to under half.
Right.
But it's like it's a piece of bread. It shouldn't be there for 50 years,
right.
like
exactly.
2 days or 3 days maybe, but it's still intact. It's pretty cool to see. But so that was the first time she was healed. But then she also...
So then when she's in the convent in Canton, one time she is helping clean the convent with a professional buffer.
Okay.
And she had put the soapy solution. I don't know if she wasn't supposed to do that or not. I don't remember that part. Maybe it wasn't supposed to happen. But so she's using the machine, but it got out of control and it just threw up against the wall. And she hurt herself. But she kind of hobbled out of it and thought she'd get better and recover. And within a period of time, she couldn't walk at all. She only could walk hunched over. And then they went to the doctor and they said she was going to have surgery. And the night before her surgery, the doctor came into her room and told her there was a 50-50 chance she'd never walk again after the surgery. And he left. She's all by herself in there. And so she kind of made a deal with God, saying, Lord, if I can walk again, I'll build you a monastery in the South. And she said she later learned to be more specific in her prayers. She should have said, if you let me walk again without pain. So she was able to walk, but she had lifelong pain and she had to wear back braces, leg braces, all these things. And then this mystic came from Italy to visit Mother. And so Mother would do her show, it's Monday and Tuesday or Tuesday and Wednesday. I can't remember. No, Monday night was catechism, so Tuesday and Wednesday. And then after the show, she'd usually get escorted back to the entrance of the convent. But this mystic wanted to meet with her. And Mother was honestly into these things. I mean, she really had a strong supernatural faith, and she loved to know that Our Lady's taking care of us. And if someone seemed serious, she would certainly be open to those things. So she agreed to meet with this woman. And so they met the same room where I interviewed, where Mother would have her staff meetings. It was off the kitchen. She got the studio. There's a studio kitchen. And then off the studio kitchen was kind of a small conference room, which served as her public office. And so they went in there to pray the rosary. And then at some point during the rosary, the mystic allegedly saw Our Lady. And then she told Mother that she needed to take off her braces and walk with her. And Mother had been prayed over before, and she'd had similar kind of offers, because without the braces, her feet would flop every which direction. She couldn't control them. So she takes off the braces, and then she starts to walk with the help of this woman. And as she walked, there's this burning sensation going up her legs. And every step she took, it got stronger. And then she came out of her office into the kitchen, and her security guard was there, and she started dancing with him. And he was like totally blown away because she didn't have the braces on. And so then I think that must have been Wednesday night, because the next night on Thursday was Life on the Rock. And she went on the show with Jeff Cavins. And so, and I have a picture from that night.
And does she tell that story
She
on
does.
that show?
She does.
Okay, I think I've seen that clip.
Yeah.
I'll have to find it.
Yeah.
Did you have, what kind of picture did you just have?
I have
Did you have a camera there that you just...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a good question. I don't know what kind of camera I had at the time, but I mean, this was before digital cameras. So I had a camera, and I have two pictures with Mother. One there, the night after the healing. And then one time my parents were visiting from Washington State at the time, and they came and I was giving them a tour of the network. And you have this little badge for access to get to different sections. So we're going in this one section, and here comes Mother. And so I was like, oh, Mother, here are my parents. And we took a picture with her. It was great.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So let's get back to seminary. So you're in the seminary. You went to Charles Borromeo.
Yes.
And that's just the bishop picks where you go.
Yeah,
because you had visited the Mount, but
when I applied, I had a meeting with the vocation director. I mean, I knew about the Mount, so I asked to go there. Then when I was accepted, it was a different vocation director, and I met with him. He called me to say, your application has been accepted, and could you come in for a meeting? I said, great, of course. And then I said to him, I'd like to go to the Mount. He says, well, the bishop would like to send you to St. Charles. I said, that's fine. I mean, at this point in my life, if you're giving your life to God in the church, you're not dictating the terms.
Right.
So I said, sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're at seminary.
Mm-hmm. The rector is Monsignor Michael Burbage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was the rector of St. Charles when we got there.
And then, he was the rector the whole time? Or was did he become bishop in Carolina?
No, he became bishop of Carolina when we were ordained.
Okay.
But at the same time. But he was there for the first, I think, 4 years I was there, because we were there and he was consecrated a bishop, I think, in 2002. I might be wrong on that. And then either 2003 or 2004, he was always an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia while being rector, but then he went more active duty because they got 10 billion parishes and all these confirmations and stuff. So he was, he really loved the seminary. He was the dean of the college. I mean, he was a graduate of the seminary, of course, dean of the college. He was secretary to Cardinal Bevilacqua, and then he was rector for a good number of years. So when I got there, it was 2000, and our classmate had cystic fibrosis, our classmate Eddie Shea from New Jersey. And periodically throughout that first year, so there's 2 years of basically philosophy and 4 years of theology. And that first year he would, go into the hospital from time to time because his lungs would fill up with fluid and mucus and stuff. And so during the summer in 2001, he had gone into this hospital again. We're praying for him with these were always typically like these preemptive strikes, like he's not getting well, so we can go to the hospital, get cleared up, and come back. Well, he died. And so then his funeral was coming, and we're going to it. But the second year at that time of theology, you would go to the spirituality year. So we're up in Northampton, Pennsylvania, near Allentown and Bethlehem at Mary Immaculate Center. And so we're just starting the spiritual year, but with his death, we're coming down to the funeral. So we get in the car. We're carpooling down to Philly, which is like an hour and a half drive. I can't remember. From Northampton down to Philly. And then one of our classmates says, you got to turn on your radios because this plane just flew into one of the towers in New York. So it's 9/11. So this was like War of the Worlds. I mean, we're sitting here driving. It's so depressing because you're going to a funeral of your buddy. And you're listening on the radio because you don't have cell phones. You can't see texts or images or whatever. And just listening to the stories as this unfolds. As one tower's hit, the second tower's hit. People freaking out around the country, the Pentagon, people jumping out of buildings, and it was bad. And then we get to this, very moving funeral, huge. Everybody's there. The whole seminary's there. The whole world's there. And then, the day of depression. And then you get back in the car, you got to drive back up to spiritual year. I think it was one point we stopped on the way back to get gas for like a potty break, pit stop. And then there was a television in the gas station and I could see the images. So year one is the Jubilee year. So there was all these great, celebrations in the Archdiocese. We had this big Eucharistic procession with Cardinal Bevilacqua on the Parkway, the cathedral, and the art museum. And then the second year starts with a funeral on 9/11. Then in 2002, the Boston Globe broke open the cases about the abuse cases, and there was the Dallas Charter. And then 2003, you're kind of reeling from all that. So now, and this is in your seminary. I mean, this is so surreal because there's all the context of when you're deciding, is this my calling? Mm-hmm. What's this going to look like serving in this context? It was a lot to process. And at the same time, you're getting closer and closer, and you're realizing, you're with your spiritual director, you're discerning the movements of God in your life. And then 2005, they had a grand jury report came out for Philadelphia proper. So there was that. And then we were ordained deacons. And then 2006, ordained a priest.
Was there any point or multiple points throughout your whole time at the seminary where you were like, I don't know if I'm supposed to do this and I should leave? Or was it just it's tough, but this is the path?
It started that way. That way. It was one of these things where it's oh, why am I doing this?
Week 2, the breakfast wasn't good and you're like,
get me out of here. Yeah. No, and I mean, they were great guys again, but no, with my spiritual director, I mean, the thing is, it was first just get through the first semester. I was I want to leave. Well, why don't you finish out the year? Okay, I'll finish out the year. And then it's well, why don't you come back for a second year?
Yeah, it's better in the spring.
Yeah, right, exactly. And, and the realization, to boil all that down was getting more and more to the point where it's all this time, it's been this fear of whatever this boogeyman is of becoming a priest and all that you have to sacrifice and all that you have to give up. And it's going to be this miserable life. But God keeps moving to open doors and invite you, and things are happening, and you're having these various, good experiences, high school on, moving you in this direction. And then I came to the realization, when you are, in order to apply for the ordination to the diaconate, you have to request it. You're asking to be a candidate for holy orders. You're writing a letter. They are very much informing you what the nature of this letter is, what you are asking for, what you are committing to. So, especially because of the crisis in the church, they've been working on this. This is one of the things, people don't often realize. As people are going through the storm of the modern era and all the problems in the church, people could have an impression everyone's asleep at the switch. And when you're in the seminary at this time, you're seeing that a lot of people have been working on things and trying to correct things. At the it's like Jesus talks about the wheat and the weeds. Do we mow them all down? There's this separation, in the final judgment, but allow the wheat to grow. The enemy has sown these weeds. So while all this stuff was unfolding, just like families raising kids and religious being religious and priests being priests, a lot of bishops and seminary rectors you could see were trying to address these problems. When we were applying, and this is 2,000 years ago, 25 years ago, in 2000.
In the time of Christ, yeah.
Right. There was so much, the process was so complex. Mm-hmm. You had to write an application. I had 2 psychological evaluations. You had to do all this stuff, and so it was not just hey, you got a pulse, you want to be a priest? Great. It's never like that. But especially in light of all these, developments that the church had been taking. And so then when we were there was a visitation of all the seminaries by the Holy See. And so all this is going on. And in the midst of all this, so on one level, if you wanted a reason to leave, there were a lot of reasons to leave. Mm-hmm. There were great men in the seminary. There's, Wisconsin doozies, but it was very impressive to see the guys who were coming, and you could see the Holy Spirit working. And you're in this relationship with our Lord, you're there visiting him in the Blessed Sacrament in the chapel, and you're like, I'm dying here, Jesus. You're not, but still, you're just on this existential drama. And then, in your meetings with your spiritual director, it's becoming more and more clear to me that God is basically, here's the situation, Lundberg, Bjorn. Yes, I'm calling you to the priesthood. I'm inviting you. This is what I want you to do. All these signs I've given you in your life are pointing you to this. It's not a romantic proposition, but it's analogous to an engagement. And you can see, the risk that God takes with every soul. God is knocking on every person, the door of everybody's heart, saying, will you open to me? There's that famous painting of Jesus standing at the door, and he's holding, it's in the evening, and he's holding up this lantern, and he's knocking. And if you look at the painting, one of the important details is there's no handle on the outside. It's only on the inside. So only the occupant can open the door. And so in a certain sense of the vocation, which is a mystery for every person, that God is working in your life, and he's knocking, and he's inviting you, and you're like terrified, like, I don't want to do this, because again, it's the fear of the unknown, because you're not really saying yes to a concept. You're not saying yes to an idea. You're saying yes to a person, well, 3 persons. And God knows you're afraid, and he knows you're terrified, and again, in spite of all the crises in 2,000 years and the ups and the downs and the drama and all this stuff, there's these amazing guys. I mean, there should be nobody in the seminaries today. There's no reason to have anybody applying to religious life or seminaries. The church is collapsing. There's all these problems, but yet God is calling people, and they're there, and you're this kind of merry band of brothers, and you're a bunch of goofy idiots, and you're praying, and you're having these adventures, but then it's just realization that God is inviting. And, my excuse for the longest time, make it easy for me, please. Have a billboard descend from the heavens. Speak a voice out loud. Tell me it's going to be okay. And, God's that still small whisper, but it's his realization that he's asking. He can't force you to say yes. And he's not just throwing a net out there and some idiot gets caught in it, and gets pulled in. It's a particular invitation for each person, in this case, for each guy in the seminary. And there were guys who went in with us and who left and got married, and it's great to see them, and they have great families, and they're raising kids. You guys move on to other things. But so it was basically about year 3, year 4, leading in towards candidacy, where you realize this is where the rubber hits the road. Either you got to make a decision or get off the fence. And so it became more and more clear, up to this point, that that God was asking this of me. And, and you have all these, lack of a term, crutches or things you're holding on to. And again, more and more, you're, in a certain sense, you're simplifying by just realizing this is an invitation into this yes to God for his plan for your life. And you're right. It is terrifying. You don't know what's coming on the other side. There's the joke that when you guys got married, if you could have seen what was coming in your marriage, you would have run screaming from the church, and when a priest gets ordained, or when a woman is espoused to Christ, if we could see what's coming down the road, we'd probably run screaming too. I mean, if I look at the last 18 years, if I had known what I was going to deal with, I probably would have said, someone else would be way better at this than me. Why don't you find a better candidate, And so I don't think this is my thing. But then, it's just amazing because yes, it's tough. Yes, it's demanding. It's always funny because it's like I'm constantly saying to God, God, yeah, I'll work for you. And yes, I'll do that, but don't ask me to do X. And it always seems inevitably God's like, well, hey, buddy, by the way, we're doing X. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, you're killing me, Smalls. It's like, no, don't ask me to do that. But he's always with you. And it's this process, like being married or raising kids or taking a leap with a business or whatever. You're kind of like, you're rolling the dice, for the sad atheist who has no reason, good person, not judging them as a person, but the poor person who has no relationship with God, doesn't know God, has no hope. And the universe is just this random chance thing of colliding atoms. And for a person who has faith, at least you have this sense that there's something to the cosmos. But then as you get to know Jesus and you realize that, yes, he holds the whole universe. God holds the Trinity holds the whole universe in being. And everything is being aligned. And so, yes, I believe in science, of course. But at the same time, God also interacts with each one of us as if we're the only person who exists. And so he has a particular call for each person. So it was, it was this realization that, okay, yes, I am saying yes to you, God. I don't know what's coming. And then I remember, the morning of my ordination to the priesthood, again, most people probably freak out beforehand. When I was a deacon, I got ordained a deacon. And that night, I'm preparing my first homily, and I had like a panic attack. Like, what did I just do? I just signed my life away. I don't know. I'm an idiot. Okay, got through that. And then the ordination to the priesthood, I went to confession, and the priest told me, remember, you're giving yourself to Christ for the sake of the church. Best advice I got. And so off we go.
How quickly after being ordained did you realize that the real world is very different from the seminary? And it was like a really eye-opening thing. Did that happen?
I didn't have that kind of experience at all. We were very much, every summer, every year in the seminary, we had assignments, pastoral assignments. It's like an internship. Mm-hmm. So the first year I was at the St. Rita Senior Center down in Broad Street in South Philly. And I would help my buddy and I, who's unfortunately, he got ordained, but he's passed away, Father Badger. we would go down there and we would lead Bible studies and we'd visit shut-ins. And there was this elderly African-American lady who had converted. She was in her 90s and she could not go to Mass. She had sickle cell anemia. She walked with this walker. The only time she could go to Mass was when the seminarians would come and walk her over to the church, which was like an eighth of a block. Probably took an hour to walk with her. And this woman, she'd spent her whole life as his domestic. She'd cleaned people's toilets for a living. And she converted like in her 80s. And, I'm walking with this lady who can barely walk, and she's this super cheerful lady, and she's like, every day above ground is a good one. Just this winning attitude. And all these experiences. And then the next year, I was a spiritual year, so I had an assignment there. And then back in Philly, I was at Holy Innocents. Then I was at Cardinal O'Hara High School. Then I was at Holy Redeemer Hospice. My diaconate year, my assignment was at St. William's Parish on Rising Sun Boulevard. And my pastor was Monsignor Nelson Perez, who's now the Archbishop of Philly. And so got great experiences at St. William's. So all that's going on. Every summer you have an assignment in a parish. So it wasn't like a sheltered existence in that sense, And I would see my family. I watch the news. I wasn't. Yeah. No, what happens is like you get ordained and you kind of go like, oh my gosh, I have 6 year preparation. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I got to start hearing confessions. I got to start doing marriage prep. I got to start doing Spanish ministry. Like right away, I was like thrown the deep end of the pool. So it's just like, in a certain sense, you're too busy and to really think too much about it.
You just do it.
You do. Yeah. It was overwhelming in a good sense. It wasn't horrible. But then it's just all theory, I have this, I always like analogies, and I have this analogy, like you're in college, you have these opinions, and then you're working, and then you're discerning this process, and you start the process in the nosebleed section of the football arena.
Right.
And then as you move down in your discernment, you're getting closer and closer to the sidelines. When you're in college, you're drinking beers, you're with your buddies at the top, yelling at the coach, you suck, you don't know what you're doing, this team's terrible, who's the coach, because you just have opinions. It doesn't cost you anything. You got no skin in the game. And you're getting closer and closer. And now you're a deacon and you're suited up and you're on the sidelines and it's pouring rain and your team is losing badly. And now you're ordained and you're out in the field and it's muddy. It's the end of the fourth quarter. The other team's up 100-0. The other team is bigger, faster, stronger with more depth to their bench. And you're going out to play and you're going to get 10 minutes of play time going down to a miserable defeat. And at this point, you don't have any hope to win. You just don't want to get killed or run over. Yeah,
it just becomes survival and doing the best you can.
Right. You have these theories about parenting and you get married and you have kids.
Right.
And you hold your child for the first time. Like, do you have a manual? I'm sure you get 20 books, but what do I do with this thing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that sense, you're getting mentored by priests. There's all kinds of ongoing formation.
Yeah. We were talking at dinner about Opus Dei and your involvement in that. We don't have to go super deep into that, but just maybe kind of in summary, what does that look like? And obviously it's not a requirement by the diocese, but why is it something that you're interested in, and what benefits do you kind of get out of that?
So there's all kinds of spiritualities in the church. People like Franciscan, Dominican, Benedictine, Jesuit, so there's a million ways to get healthy. For a guy who's overweight, all my analogies are sports because of being in high school. So there's all kinds of ways to get fit. You want to play mini golf, you want to walk, you want to do CrossFit, whatever. And so everybody's kind of got a spiritual recipe that seems to speak to them in their hearts. And, I first read about Opus Dei in high school. I was kind of drawn to San Jose Maria. But then when I was in college, I knew some people in it. And then in seminary, I knew some priests who were in Opus Dei. Either they were for the prelates or they were ordained to serve the people of Opus Dei. But then I also knew diocesan priests who got kind of spiritual counseling, and guidance formation from Opus Dei activities. And then once I was ordained, I told you at dinner the story. We went to a pilgrimage with the high school. Our high school was John Paul the Great. We went on a John Paul the Great pilgrimage to Poland and Italy. We were in Rome. And it was the Feast of Peter and Paul, and I needed to say Mass. It was a Sunday, and I couldn't do it with the group. So I called up to the Villa Tevere, where San Jose Maria is buried. I just said, hey, I butchered Spanish and Italian. Could I come say Mass there? And this woman said, I have to transfer you. And I talked to this guy, and I said, could I come say Mass at the tomb? And he said, yeah, come. I said, oh, okay. So I showed up, and I said Mass there. And Sister Mary Jordan, who was my boss at John Paul the Great, and a couple of friends were with me. And later she told me, because when I would go sometimes to these prayer groups with Opus Dei priests, she said, that's really good for you. I think you should continue doing that. It kind of pumps you up and it helps your vocation. So she always supported that. But then when we went to Rome and had the Mass, she said, well, Father, I prayed to St. Josemaria. I said, I don't know what you do for diocesan priests, but can you do that for Father Lundberg? And so when a Dominican sister prays for you, that gets answered quick.
Yeah.
And so then I had the opportunity to spend more time with understanding what the kind of spiritual game plan is. And just St. Josemaria had a particular heart for people in the world, that normal people, lay people, people in regular jobs don't become holy in spite of that. They become holy through that. And that God can be found in ordinary professions and work. And he had a particular care for parish priests, diocesan priests, because they don't have the structure of a religious order. So Opus Dei provides for diocesan priests as a possibility a spiritual game plan and kind of a support system where you go to basically a prayer group, some recollections, some ongoing professional development classes. And it's just a way to kind of keep you engaged and give you some fraternity and support. If I was a Dominican, or, some priests go to Jesu Caritas groups, so people, like I know a priest who wants to join the Third Order Dominicans as a priest. And so you do study of the teachings of Thomas Aquinas and St. Dominic, all this. And so with the Opus Dei provides this kind of option for parish priests. And so I benefit from that, and it helps. I mean, I feel like I'm the special needs version of this because I feel like on the slow boat to China, like everyone else got the game plan down about 10 years ago. I'm still like reading the introductory manual, but.
Yeah. Do you feel especially that way being a pastor?
Oh yeah. Totally.
That you're like not only thrown in the deep end. I don't know if you've ever heard this bit, but I think it's, I can't remember if it's Tim Hawkins or Jim Gaffigan. I think it's Jim Gaffigan. And he has this bit on being parents. And he's like, yeah, being a parent is great. He's like, you have a kid, you have a second kid. He's like, you have a third kid. He's like, but by the time the third kid comes around, it's like you're in the deep end of a swimming pool and you're drowning and then someone hands you a baby. Right. And I've always thought of that as like either for parents or for someone who becomes a pastor young or just a pastor of a big parish with a lot of complexity, is that it's like, it's not only that you are already drowning and having a hard time, then they give you something and say, oh, here's the priority. And like, or here's a rock, and then you just have to go with it.
God is always helping you to grow in humility.
Yeah.
And so you can have, like in my bleacher sidelines analogy, you have all these theories about how to do everything, and then you get ordained. Mm-hmm. You have theories about parenting and you become a parent, and don't get me wrong, your ideas may be very good, but they're often informed abstractions. But then suddenly I have to prepare this homily, or I have to do this wedding, or I have to do this burial, or I have to counsel somebody in the confessional who's facing a big crisis. And so you realize, it's a lot like the analogy, like, oh, you're my dad, you don't understand me, and then you suddenly become like, wow, Dad was really smart,
Mark Twain, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing, because the longer I'm a priest, what comes home to me more and more, when I was first ordained, if somebody asked, why can't women be priests? It'd be a good question kids would ask. And so you go through these very theological answers. And then the more, and also it was often combined with a question about the vocation. And they would say, Father, what's a vocation like? And for a long time, I'd say it was like a spam call on your phone. You're trying to block it. Can I block this caller? So God will stop
Keeps calling back
me.
with different numbers.
Right, exactly. You want to renew your auto warranty? So I don't want to talk to you. So send it to voicemail. But so then I'm more and more cognizant of the fact that the reason why women serves as mothers, priests serve as fathers. In terms of power and authority, Americans don't often lose a distinction there. They will often conflate the two. You have power and you're authoritative. I shouldn't be running anything. The parish is in spite of me, but yes, God equips you. What's the line? God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. But the longer I serve, I realize you look at all the wounds with fatherhood, especially the terrible wounds of the abuse by priests. It's far more devastating and it's far more scandalous because people trust you. They put their souls, their hearts, themselves in your hands. So to abuse them, it's just far more scandalous. But beyond that, in our culture, people have good parents. They have good dads. And maybe, sometimes they have horrible experiences and horrible abuse. But, everybody, I always joke, we're putting the fun back in dysfunctional. We all come from dysfunctional families. Our parents, you get older, you're raising kids, or you suddenly have a job, you're a priest, and you realize, wow, my mom and dad had tons of wisdom and they were doing great things for me, and I didn't understand it at the time. And so when you're meeting with souls, when you're meeting with people, I'm just very cognizant internally of like, what's this person's experience of fatherhood, of men, of authority, of religion, of the institutional church, of Catholicism specifically, and you don't get a printout in advance. ChatGPT doesn't give me a report. Okay, this is so-and-so, and these are all their wounds and their issues. And so you just realize, yes, there are many things a priest does, and he does have authority, but all of this is oriented towards the service of souls in, God's will. He sent Jesus to reconcile, to save us. Jesus died on the cross for us out of love, not because he was angry. And he didn't just write a blank check for the human race. I never understood that line in Hebrews. Son though he was made perfect by suffering, and when he had, what do you mean? Jesus was perfect. What do you mean perfect by suffering? Meaning, achieving perfection in this case in the original language was when he achieved the purpose for which he was sent. He was not sent to just do a big reset button for the human race. In his passion, Jesus embraced every single person in their humanity. St. Therese is very cognizant of this. So your story, my story, every person's experience, their suffering, their weakness, their sinfulness, the abuse they've suffered, the trauma, their darkness, their doubts, their fears. Our Lord took all that on for every person. He knew you on the cross by name. He gave his life for you out of love. And so he doesn't just want functionaries to serve him. And yes, we need institutional presence. And yes, you have to have certain systems of order to serve the mission of the church. But again, you're called and you're transformed. You're being transformed as a husband and a father and as a man in Christ. And a priest is called to do this. And so, it's painful. You have strengths and you have big weaknesses. And when you become in charge, your weaknesses are even more glaring to everybody around you. And they're very cognizant of your weaknesses, and you are too. And, so it's challenging. And again, what's fascinating is all the negatives are always these answered by the positive of Christ. Yes, you're not crazy. It is overwhelming, but you can't do it. And no, you can't do it at all on your own. Without me, you can do nothing. With God, all things are possible. And as you learn that through experience, you can be a better evangelist. When you confront your own weaknesses and your own fears and your need to grow and your need for conversion, then you can help encourage other people on their journey. And so as a priest, you are a father of souls. And you can do a lot of damage, but you try to trust God, and try to, get better. But it's a fascinating thing, So you dive into the priesthood and you realize, if you, how many kids do you have?
2.
Okay. So the first one, you figure that one out. You think you got that right. And then the second kid comes along. I got this down now. Right. And then the second kid's got a different personality and it's different from the first one. Like, wait. I thought we had this down,
Right.
And the third kid's going to have a different personality, So, you learn from your brother priest, you see, wow, they got a lot of wisdom. You can understand why people do the way they do. And at the same time, depending on your temperament, you might be inclined to say, hey, how can we do this better? There's different, it humbles you because you realize that your brother priests are all fighting this battle. They're all saying yes to God. They're all putting their life at the service of Christ for the sake of the church. And God made all those people, and he made all these parishioners, and all these parishioners are his kids. And he died for these people, and he loves them. And you better learn how to love them too. And it's not an emotional reality at first. Oftentimes it's a learned decision. I may want to do it my way, and and maybe sometimes your way is good, or it's part of the game plan. But sometimes you're learning. Well, a lot of times you're learning. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah, I heard a interesting story, and I don't know all the details, so I'm hoping you can elaborate. But I heard part of the story that you were stuck over in the Holy Land at a certain point.
Right. Yeah.
How did that kind of come about? And it sounds like it was a little bit of a trying time there.
So 2009, Father Magat, I was at St. Mary in Fredericksburg, St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception. Father Ronnie was the pastor. Father Magat was assigned at St. William of York, nearby, more or less. And he had a custom of taking, and he still does, he takes groups to the Holy Land. So there was a small group, about 12 people. It was Father Magat, myself, about 10, 12 other people. And my parents came, which was nice. So we went over there. It was really, I always felt like a bad Catholic because I never had a desire to go to the Holy Land, to be honest with you. But it was a very powerful experience. I remember he worked the whole trip out, Father did, and we got to have Mass in the Holy Sepulchre. Wow. But it's like you have 30 minutes, soup to nuts, and you have to be out of there. And there's like a line of 10 billion people out there. So you're in there, and there's this tiny little entrance. You know, if you go to the Franciscan Monastery, the Holy Land, there's a replica. So you got to bend down to get in. And then there's that antechamber, which has this stand that has part of the rock that blocked the tomb. Then you go through another little hobby hole or whatever, and you get in there, and there's all of us in there. So you're kind of packed in there. It's this tight space with 12 people in there. There's not a lot of air movement. And all of a sudden I start, and I don't think of myself as hypochondriac or whatever. I'm hyperventilating, but I'm like, I'm going to pass out. I'm going to pass out. I'm going to clunk my head. What if I die here? Lundberg, you're an idiot. If you die in Jesus' tomb, that's a pretty good place to die. And Father, my God, I'll give you a last rite. So don't worry about it. You know? But so that was a very powerful experience. And then over the years, people had said, if you ever go to the Holy Land, let us know. We'd like to go. So we worked with Joe Long from Pro Rome Tours, and we set up this trip to go in October of 23. And so we arrived on Monday. We left Sunday, got there Monday. We were in the Sea of Galilee region. Then on Thursday, we went to Jerusalem. And then on Friday, I'm trying to think, we were in Bethlehem. And then Saturday morning, they had this original plan, which they changed. And so the new game plan was we're going to have Mass at the Garden of Gethsemane and then go to these other places. So we are there at this altar in the place where Jesus sweat blood. I mean, this is mind-blowing. You know, it's like you go to Monticello or Mount Vernon and say, well, this is where George Washington slept, and this is his desk. And you're like, wow, he was short. You know, this reality kicks in, not the father of our country, and look at this little tiny desk or whatever. And so now you're like in these places, Dr. Carroll, truth exists, the incarnation happened. It's this abstract concept. This is the very place where the Annunciation happened. This is the place where he taught the Our Father. This is the place where he sweat blood for you and began his passion, or entered into his agony more deeply. So we're there, we're having Mass. During Mass, I'm hearing these sounds. Now, I'm an Army brat. I grew up. We lived at Fort Lewis when I was in high school. They used to do military drills regularly. It was not unusual to hear these. It was just things. It was part of life. So we're in the Mass, and we're hearing this. And I'm thinking to myself, is this normal? I know we're in the Holy Land. I know it's the Middle East. Things are really crazy. Is this just a drill? Well, what we were hearing was the Iron Dome going off. At the same time, an hour south, or 60 miles south, the invasion was happening in Gaza. Mass ends. Our tour guide comes out. He says, Father, we have to get everybody on the bus, and we have to go back to the hotel, which was a very short place, like 5-10 minutes away. It wasn't a long drive. And he told me what was going on, so I'm trying to keep calm and everything. So we ground everybody, we get them on the bus, and then as we're driving back, I'm explaining that this war has started. Well, this invasion has happened. And the tourism industry and the defense ministry wants us, the State Department wants us to be back at the hotel. We're staying at this Notre Dame Center, which is a very good location in Jerusalem. So this begins. So this is Saturday. We were scheduled to leave already Wednesday anyways, but we had all these days left. And so, sorry, with no disrespect, no pun intended, our plans are all blown up. Now, the great thing was we were a 10-minute walk to the Holy Sepulchre. And normally when you walk to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem in the Old City, and I don't mean to be super tacky, I'm like a walking Buddha to a shop tender. Here's this overweight American priest. I'm like a big walking credit card. Come into my shop, my friend. All these special things I have for you. The city is jangling with people. You're hustling and bustling, and you're making your way to this, all these holy shrines. Well, it's a ghost town. Now, they tell us you cannot leave you have no protection if you leave the hotel officially, because the group has to keep you there. But on your own reconnaissance, with your own free will, if you want to leave, you can. So there was a group of us who went on the first day. We stayed at the hotel, and they had a beautiful exhibit and shrine on the Shroud of Turin. So we went to that, and there was a beautiful chapel in the hotel with the Blessed Sacrament. So we would have Mass there. But then on Sunday, we were able to go to the Holy Sepulchre, and it was a ghost town. And then we get there, but then the whole time we're scrambling to get back. And I mean, I can't go into all the details, but it was a nightmare. I mean, it was totally peaceful. I felt safe all the time. It was a very surreal experience. You could see bombings in the distance. There's smoke rising. I'm looking at Twitter and the news. I know what's going on in Gaza. But then, airlines are shutting down service, and they're trying to figure out, we're working with the tour group. So internally it was a nightmare, and I'm sitting from the Blessed Sacrament like, okay, Jesus, what are we going to do here? And at the same time, people would come, like this woman who was a tour agent was in the church with me, and we were talking, and she gave this advice. At the end, it all worked out. I felt like it was in the movie Argo. I mean, to some extent. And we have to take a bus from the Notre Dame Center, essentially through the West Bank, to the gate. What's the name of this General so-and-so gate? Bradley Gate, something gate, into Jordan. One group from America had spent 7 hours at that border waiting. We had to wait an hour and a half. We got through, we went through all this security check, and then we had to switch buses to a Jordanian bus. We got on that bus, and now I'm thinking, great, we're kind of home clear. It's an hour drive to the airport. We're going to fly out of Amman to Dubai and then connect back to Dulles. So then I'm like, okay, good. We keep praying rosaries and chaplets and all this stuff. Well, then we have to stop. I don't know if you've ever seen The Man Who Knew Too Much, the Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that. We stopped at this bus depot from hell. I mean, it was like, where are we? And then this military guy got on the bus, and then we all had to take all our luggage off. We had to go through a security screening. And then we got back on the bus. And then at one point, our tour guide and our associates, we knew they were good guys. They rounded up all 50 of our passports, took them off to be scanned. You're thinking, I'm never going to get my passport back. We're never going to get out of here. We got the passports back. We got on the road. We got to the airport. We had to go through security. We checked in. We had to go to another security and another screening. And essentially 5 minutes later, we're at the gate and the plane's about to board. And then we fly on this Emirates flight to Dubai. We get there at like 2 a.m. And we waited there. And then it was like a 14-hour flight back to Dulles. I didn't literally kiss the ground, but it was kind of close to it.
Yeah. Left the Holy Land, but kind of returned to the Holy Land.
Yeah, right now. Exactly.
Yeah. Wow, that's scary.
So, I mean, it was amazing. And I mean, you see people from the trip and, I mean, again, but it was powerful to be to the Holy Land. And then at the same time too, I wasn't posting stuff on social media. I was just like, I didn't want to make a big deal of the trip. But then at the same time, I thought when I came back, I'd post some pictures. But then I'm in contact with the parish and I was in contact with the diocese. And I know that people were worrying. So then I was just posting, here we are safe, we are well protected. I wanted to clarify what you're seeing on the news is happening south of us. We're right here by the holiest shrines. We are protected. The State Department's nearby to reassure people. And it was true. Internally, I'm still very worried, but that's going on. And so then like the local news picked it up. The parish was letting me know because it became kind of an interest that they had people from Winchester there. And then the communications office was helping with all this, because there were questions about interviews and things.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
But no, it was powerful to know everybody was praying for you.
Yeah.
So
then I think I mentioned in your bio that you were on EWTN's, was it Morning Glory for a while? And that was just a past contact.
What happened was I was the chaplain at the high school, and one of my former coworkers had messaged me on Facebook and said, hey, we're starting up a radio show in DC, and the network has a studio where they were filming their programs, their News Nightly and all that. And they have a radio studio, and we're starting this radio morning show. And honestly, at first I thought what they were asking was for like a list of priests that maybe they could call on, to be on. And then I talked to some other former bosses, if you will, superiors at the network. And then I went in for an interview to talk to them, and they clarified, well, yes, they wanted some priests. They were actually serious about having to be on at least one day every week. And I said, well, my job is to be a priest, a chaplain at the high school. I don't really know how this is going to work. I can't commit to it, and I don't know that it's going to be approved. So, but I'll check. And so I contacted the bishop's office and the communications office, and I talked to Sister Bear Jordan about it. And what Bishop Laverty at the time said was, is Sister okay with this? It would be once a week. And I said, yes, she was okay with it. He said, well, then that's okay. I said, let's see how it goes. And so I would go in on Tuesdays. I believe it was Tuesdays. So it was Tuesday or Wednesday. I would go spend the night at a parish in Northern Virginia. And then I would drive in the morning, go into DC and do the show and then come back. And then when I got assigned to the parish, I thought it was going to have to wrap up. And at first it didn't. I would do it remotely, right? We said I had to set up on my computer with a special connection. And I did that for another year. So I think it was 4 or 5 years. Okay. And so the position was called the Godly Counsel. And it was it's there to kind of provide some pastoral guidance or insight, answer questions. They had sort of various formats over the course of the 4 or 5 years, how they conducted the show. So that was on. And then they decided not to renew the show. Okay. And in the long run, that was providential just because the demands of the parish. It was already busy, but it was, maybe, I don't even know if now I could pull it off. But.
Yeah. Is it odd having Father Fasano at your parish now? Like someone who was one of the three priests you wrote to initially about being a priest, and now he's not like serving for you. He's in retirement, but technically he is.
Well, it was wild having Father Wiley work for me, and it's wild having Father Fasano work for me. And it's interesting too, because Father Fasano's history, he was ordained, and his first assignment was Sacred Heart in Winchester.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
And when he left, at the time it was a one-horse town, but he's from Brooklyn. And he lived and worked in New York. And, Winchester was not exactly a bustling metroplex in 1977. And so he was there for a year. I think it was maybe longer, maybe a couple of years. And he was willing to serve, and he served with generosity. He's like a lot of cool stories, a lot of funny stories. But when he was ready, I think, in my words, to shake the dust from his feet and move on when he went inside the Beltway from the outer darkness. But so he never would have thought he would have wanted to come back to Winchester. Now, having said that, years later, his sister, who was a public school teacher in New York, moved to Virginia after her retirement in New York. She continued as a public school teacher in Virginia. And then she and Father looked for a final home for them in the Winchester area. Mm-hmm. And so even though he was pastor in Front Royal, his sister had this home. And eventually when he was going to retire, he had an apartment there where he would live.
Okay.
And so, again, God's providence, his sense of humor.
Yeah.
So, on one level, this is one of the great humbling things. You're like, you have all these guys with all this experience who know what they're doing, and you don't know what you're doing, and they're working for you, and they're thinking you're an idiot, but they love you, so they're kind of putting up with you being an idiot.
Yeah.
So, but he's very supportive, very helpful.
They just have a separate text chain
they
about
do,
you.
Totally, I'm sure.
Look what he's doing now.
I know what I would never have done that.
Yes, Father.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, totally.
All right, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I do have a gift for you before you go.
Okay.
This is a Mayflower Dawn cigar. I don't know if you know anything about the company, but this is a company that Michael Knowles started through the Daily Wire. He's got a bunch of different stuff, but he's got, it's all kind of Mayflower themed. Okay. So obviously the brand name is Mayflower.
Right.
But he's got lighters and cutters and all kinds of stuff, just trying to introduce people to cigar culture.
Sure.
So you can get different sampler packs, different things. He's not like a sponsor or anything.
Brought to you in part by Mayflower Cigar Company.
Right. Yeah, you must be 21 years or older to apply. Some exclusions are there. So, but this is a lighter. It's a Connecticut wrapper. So if you're not a fan of darker, heavy cigars, this is a good one.
It's great.
A lot of people drink it in the morning with coffee. So that's for you.
Oh, wow. I'm sure the priest in the rectory would be happy if I'm smoking a cigar with my coffee.
Yeah, probably not, but you can try. You're the pastor, right? So what are they going to do about it?
They have to live with you. Yeah. So
complain to the bishop.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on tonight. It was good to talk to you, and
I
appreciate the time. If you wouldn't mind closing us in a quick prayer, that'd be great.
In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. To paraphrase Saint Therese in her Offering to Merciful Love, Heavenly Father, there are countless souls who will not allow you to love them as you wish to love them. Pour out that love into our hearts. Help us to accept your love for us in this Lenten season as we draw closer to Holy Week and the sacred Triduum. Help us to realize more than ever how much you love us, that your plan for us is good, and that you are a loving Father, that we can entrust ourselves into your arms, into your care, that you have a good plan for our life. And may everyone who listens to this and all who produces it for Anthony and everybody be blessed. Name the Father and the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.